If she was not a member of the 100 schools of philosophers, chances were that she was related to the otherworldly demonic tribe. This possibility was further supported by how knowledgeable she was regarding Kongsha and the secrets of the master-teacher continent, possibly knowing even more than the esteemed Yangsha. The only possibilities that Zhongxian could think of was that she belonged to either of those two major powers. If she was from the 100 schools of philosophers, considering how the 100 schools of philosophers was under Kongsha's lineage, even if she was not a master-teacher, her identity would still be accepted on the master-teacher continent. The problem was that Zhongxian had looked into the clans of the 100 schools of philosophers, and there was no Luo clan among them. If she was really an otherworldly demon, that would spell trouble. Ultimately, Zhongxian's allegiance still lay with mankind. Even if he loved Luo Ruoxin, he could not compromise on his values and principles. This was his bottom line. Love was important, but it could not be one's everything. I'm not an otherworldly demon. Knowing what Zhongxian was worried about, Luo Ruoxin shook her head and chuckled softly. Don't worry, I'll never do anything that would harm mankind. I'm here just to find something that a very close relative of mine lost. A very close relative? Yuan. He is someone that I really respected. He imparted my values and principles to me when I was younger. Those days that I spent with him were happy and worryless, but... At this point, Luo Ruoxin suddenly fell silent as she lowered her head in contemplation. An aura of sorrow seemed to gloom around her as her hands trembled slightly in Zhongxian's grasp. If I had a choice, I would rather the one who had met such a mishap be me instead of him. Hearing that Luo Ruoxin had no relations with the otherworldly demon, Zhongxian inwardly heaved a sigh of relief before hurriedly consoling her. If that relative of yours is ill, I might be able to help him. Possessing the library of Heaven's Path, he was able to trace down the root of any illness. I have a few books containing my insights of spatial laws here, and they might be of some use to your cultivation, Wu Chen said as he passed a couple of books over. He might have appeared to be a 13 to 14-year-old boy in his adolescence on the surface, but when it came to cultivation, he swiftly assumed the air of an old expert, reminiscent of a grandmaster of the current era. Thanks. Having witnessed the adolescent boy's skillful manipulation of space, Zhongxian knew that the books that the other party had offered him were bound to be extraordinary. He quickly picked up the books and browsed through them, and before long, he was nodding in approval. These books came nowhere close to matching the heavenly art of Dimension Unravel, but their contents were worth ruminating over. If he compiled those books with the heavenly art of Dimension Unravel, he should be able to resolve a handful of the flaws in the latter. Just as he was about to do so, he suddenly saw the adolescent boy looking over with a grim look on his face. These books are profound, so you must make sure to go through them very carefully. If there's anything that you don't understand, make sure to clarify it with me as soon as possible. Don't get greedy and attempt to forcefully push your way ahead. As long as you study diligently, given your talent, it won't be impossible for you to reach St. Ninden Pinnacle within a single month. A single month? Zhongxian was taken aback. Indeed. The adolescent boy placed his hands behind his back and declared confidently, I know that it's inconceivable to achieve a breakthrough to St. Ninden Pinnacle in such a short period of time, but with my deep understanding of space, I'm confident that you'll be able to achieve it with my strict guidance. No, that's not what I meant. What I am saying is that 1 month is too long. Zhongxian scratched his head awkwardly. Too long. The adolescent boy was flabbergasted by what he had just heard. Indeed. It'll be hard to explain it with words, so just give me a moment, and I'll show you, Zhongxian said before closing his eyes. Hong long. In an instant, Zhongxian drove his zhenqi to its limit, and soon, his cultivation began surging ahead. After leaving the main hall of the Luo clan, his parents had passed him a storage ring filled with the St. Ninden cultivation technique manuals that Ren Qingyuan had entrusted to them. With a swift glance over those books, he had collected them into the Library of Heaven's Path and compiled them to form the St. Ninden Heaven's Path Divine Art. While the adolescent boy's books on spatial laws were a great help, ultimately, they were only supporting material when it came to raising one's cultivation. In this world, there was nothing more suitable for raising one's cultivation than the Heaven's Path Divine Art. Back when he was still at the Zhong clan, Sword Saint Xing had given him a huge stockpile of cultivation resources. Even after raising his Zhenqi cultivation, soul cultivation, and the cultivation of the Inferno Chiline and Netherworld Azure Dragon Beast, he still had more than half of the stockpile left. Since there was nothing to do at the moment, this was a good opportunity to push for a breakthrough. Gu 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 gu. His Zhenqi raced furiously through his meridians before accumulating in his dantian, and in just a few moments, he had already broken through his previous bottleneck. Macrocosm Ascendancy Realm Primary Stage. Macrocosm Ascendancy Realm Intermediate Stage. This. The adolescent boy could not help but stagger backward with a pale face. How can he grow so quickly? The macrocosm ascendancy realm required a cultivator to enhance their understanding of spatial laws and accumulate sufficient energy simultaneously in order to achieve a breakthrough. It was just a moment ago that he had handed over his books, and the young man was already achieving breakthroughs as if it was nothing at all. Furthermore, he was improving with an imposing momentum that showed no signs of slowing down at all, such that it almost seemed as if he was just releasing a seal on his cultivation. How could someone be so talented? Seeing how shocked Wu Chen was, Luo Ruoxin explained with a light chuckle, his condition is a little special, so it's no surprise that he can achieve breakthroughs so quickly. As a celestial master teacher, a person whose talent was recognized by even the heavens, it did not come as a surprise no matter how fast he grew. Special. But no matter how special his condition is, such an extent is inconceivable. The adolescent boy exclaimed in disbelief. Boom. Before the adolescent boy could even finish his words, Zhongxian's cultivation had already come to a halt. He exhaled a mouthful of turbid gas as his cultivation stabilized at Saint Nine Dan Pinnacle. Done. Zhongxian clapped his hand in satisfaction before directing a smile at Wu Chen. How's that? It didn't take a month, right? Chapter 1584 Who is guiding whom? The adolescent boy shook his head vehemently, almost as if he was expecting to see something different once he was done shaking. He had seen geniuses and experts from various races, and he had clashed with the top experts of the continent. It went without saying that he had confidence in his judgment and talent. But, to advance one's cultivation so easily as if it was just walk in the park, he had never even heard of something like this before, let alone seen it. Even Kong Shabak then did not seem to have improved so quickly. Was this still a humanly possible deed? You managed to achieve a breakthrough from the books I just gave you, the adolescent boy questioned. It was only after taking his books and flipping through them that the young man abruptly achieved breakthroughs to Saint Ninden Pinnacle. Could it be that his books had inspired the young man? Then again, he had written those books personally, and he knew their contents by heart. There should not have been anything in them that would allow one to advance one's cultivation so quickly. Oh, I had a look at those books, and while they do offer a fresh perspective, there are simply too many flaws with them. It would be problematic to cultivate them directly. Zhongxian replied earnestly. Too many flaws. Problematic. Those words immediately riled the adolescent boy up. He was able to overcome the demon-subduing sphere of the Luo clan easily with a flick of his hand and carry out a spatial leap to cover several million li in just a few moments. No matter how one looked at it, his comprehension of spatial laws was definitely on par with the heritage of the Luo clan, if not surpassing it. Yet, for what he had personally written to be described with too many flaws and problematic. And that disdainful look on the young man's face was not helping either. Disdain your head. May I know what kind of flaws there are in my books that made you find them problematic? Why don't you share them so that I can learn from my mistakes? It took some effort for the adolescent boy to calm himself down and squeeze those words politely out of his mouth. If not for Luo Ruoxin watching by the side, he would have given that arrogant young fellow a good smack. I guess I could enlighten you since you are asking so politely. Zhongxian nodded. You wrote in the book that the more stable a space is, the more unlikely it will collapse. Only in stable spaces should one find wormholes and conduct spatial leaps, or else the stress from the spatial leap could potentially cause the space to collapse inward, and that would be dangerous. That's indeed the case. The adolescent boy nodded. The stability in folded spaces is severely lacking. If one places it under too much stress, it will collapse on itself. Thus, abilities like spatial leap are only feasible on the master-teacher continent, where space is far more stable. Is there any mistake in that interpretation? Such an interpretation of space had been acknowledged by expert cultivators over the past tens of thousands of years. It was impossible for there to be a mistake with it. Yes, there is a huge mistake in that interpretation. You are assuming space to be stationary, Zhongxian replied. Assuming space to be stationary? Are you implying that space flows like a river? The adolescent boy burst into laughter. You must be messing with me. If the space we live in is moving, how can we possibly be unaware of it? The world we are standing on is constantly moving. Are you able to feel its movements? Zhongxian replied. This. The adolescent boy was taken aback. He had flown high enough to see the entire master-teacher continent before, and from afar, he could tell that the continent was in a state of constant rotation, giving it day and night. But when he was standing on the continent, its rotation was imperceptible to him. As a result of that, they have finer control over space than ordinary cultivators. However, you mentioned that you have books from the soul oracles? Zhongxian frowned. Of all the occupations that he had come into contact with, the one that had the greatest control over space was indubitably the soul oracle. In fact, Soul Traverse was the very proof of the soul oracle's ingenuity when it came to space. It was unfortunate that the soul oracles and their heritage had been destroyed by the master-teacher pavilion after they had chosen to ally themselves with the otherworldly demonic tribe. Even Lu Chong had only managed to obtain their heritage through entering the secret ancient domain of the soul oracles, so where in the world did the adolescent boy find the books of the soul oracles? Furthermore, judging from his tone, it seemed like he had accessed quite a huge collection of them at that. Or, could it be that the 100 schools of philosophers still had the heritage of soul oracles with them? That was possible, considering that their heritage had come directly from Kongsha. Instead of answering Zhongxian's question, the adolescent boy looked at him earnestly and asked, other than the idea of stationary space, may I know what other errors the books have? If he thought that Zhongxian was spouting nonsense previously, after that exchange, it had already become apparent to him that the young man's understanding of space was likely to be deeper than his. There is a total of 13 major conceptual flaws in your books. Zhongxian replied honestly. Luo Ruoxin. Her intention was to have Wu Chen offer pointers to the person that she loved so as to help him advance his cultivation. But somehow, things seemed to have gone in a different direction from what she had expected. Not only so, Wu Chen was even nodding vehemently, as if having epiphanies one after another. Just who was guiding whom? Just as Zhongxian was about to go through the 13 flaws in detail, Luo Ruoxin suddenly sent a telepathic message to the two of them. Someone is coming. The two of them widened their eyes in alarm as they quickly fell silent. Earlier, when they landed in the vicinity, they had already used a secret art to seal the space around them and conceal their presence. As such, even if they continued speaking, no one in the external world would be any the wiser. Zhongxian turned his head forward, and without him realizing, several long-robed figures had appeared in the midst of the mountain range. Their robes were made in a similar fashion to that of the master-teacher robe, but perhaps because they were made of black cloth, Zhongxian could not help but find them a little incongruent and odd. He activated his eye of insight to take a closer look. There were 4 people in total. They did not look too old on the surface, seemingly only in their early to middle 30s. Are they the otherworldly demons who have kidnapped Zhao Ya and the others? Zhongxian's eyebrows shot up. His previous analysis of the incident was that the culprits could only be the 100 schools of philosophers or the otherworldly demonic tribe. Since Luo Ruoxin was not an otherworldly demon, it stood to reason that the group in front of him was from the otherworldly demonic tribe. Clenching his fists tightly, he took a deep breath as he readied himself to activate the blood droplet in his hand at any moment. He turned to the young lady beside him and asked, "Now? Wait a moment first." Luo Ruoxin shook her head. "We aren't too familiar with the ancient domain, so it would be best to let them enter first before deciding our next move." "All right." Zhongxian nodded. Chapter 1585. Ancient Sage Ran Qiu. He had only learned about this place from the copper-masked figure's painting. As for the exact location of where the ancient domain was, What was hidden in the ancient domain, and what kind of dangers lay in it, he was completely oblivious. Since these otherworldly demons were intending to enter the ancient domain, he was more than happy to let them scout the way ahead for them. Even if they were discovered afterward, he could activate Kong Shi's blood droplet to deal with them. As long as none of them were ancient sages, he was confident that he could kill or even apprehend them all. Where is it? While they were lying in wait, the 4 new arrivals were carefully scanning the area, seemingly trying to determine the exact location of the folded space. Give me a moment, I'll check on it. A frail-looking young man took a step forward, and with a tap on his finger, a book materialized and floated right in front of him, emanating a faint turquoise glow. It looks quite similar to the book you have, Zhong Xian remarked to Luo Ruoxin. In terms of appearance, it could be said to be identical to the one that she had acquired from the Qiu Wu Palace. It seemed like she was indeed right. There was more than one clue leading to the ancient domain. It seemed like it was not without reason that the otherworldly demonic tribe had been able to render mankind utterly helpless until Kong Shi appeared. They were indeed far more resourceful than he had thought. Not even the Master-Teacher Pavilion was aware of the distinction between the Master Amulet and the subordinate amulets, yet the otherworldly demonic tribe had already acquired the artifact required to track the Master Amulet down. Wang. The book gradually drifted ahead, slowly combing the entire area before abruptly jolting. With a light buzz, it came to a halt. It's here, the frail-looking young man exclaimed. UN. The young man who had issued the command before nodded as he quickly rushed over. This young man had a clean-looking face and the air of a scholar, which formed a stark contrast to the vicious appearance of the otherworldly demons that Zhong Xian had met before. If not for the fact that he had appeared there was no way that one would have been able to imagine that he was one of the culprits who had made a move against Zhao Yue and the others. Previously, Zhong Xian had heard that the otherworldly demonic emperors were able to impersonate humans, such that even master teachers would have difficulties seeing through their disguise. From the looks of it now, that was indeed true. Open. The scholarly young man raised his hand and pumped a surge of tremendous power into the space in front of him. Jiyaya. A deafening noise echoed in the air as a door made solely out of light materialized before their eyes. Incredible energy flowed within the door of light, making it impossible to discern where the door would lead one to. Instead of entering the ancient domain immediately, the scholarly young man turned around and instructed severely, "Everyone, be careful. This ancient domain was left behind by ancient sage Ran Qiu, so we must maintain the utmost caution." The other 3 young men quickly nodded in response. Ancient sage Ran Qiu? Zhong Xian gasped in astonishment. The 72 direct disciples of Kong Shi were known as the 72 philosophers. Of them, the 10 strongest disciples were collectively known as the 10 apostles, and ancient sage Ran Qiu was one of the apostles. He was equal to ancient sage Bo Shong in terms of standing, and in terms of strength, he was reputed to be the strongest among the 10 apostles. Back during the war with the otherworldly demonic tribe, he had charged into armies of enemies with just a single spear in hand, killing innumerable otherworldly demonic emperors. In fact, he was the founder of the Combat Master Hall. If he was indeed the man behind the ancient domain, there was little doubt that the ancient domain would be fraught with dangerous trials. Let's go. After warning the others to keep their guard up, the scholarly young man walked into the door of light, and with a pulsation of energy, he disappeared from everyone's sight. The other 3 young men followed behind him, and they vanished in the blink of an eye as well. Let's head in, too. Seeing that the 4 of them had entered the door of light, Zhong Xian was just about to step out of their concealment when Luo Ruoxin suddenly grabbed his arm and said, "Wait a moment first." Zhong Xian was taken aback for a moment before widening his eyes in realization. Have they noticed our presence? I don't think they are able to sense our presence, but I think it's better to be safe, Luo Ruoxin replied before falling silent. They waited on the spot for roughly half a tea's time before the door of light suddenly wavered once more. The scholarly young man who had entered first earlier walked out, scanned the surroundings, and heaved a sigh of relief after finding nothing. After which, he entered the door of light once more. This time, the door of light did not last too long before dissipating. What a cautious bunch they are. To think that they would be hiding on the other side of the door, waiting to ambush anyone tailing them. If we had entered earlier, we would have been attacked. Zhong Xian was astonished. All along, he had been the one scheming against others, but who would have thought that his complacency would nearly get the better of him? If not for Luo Ruoxin stopping him, he might have fallen into their trap. It was true that activating Kong Shi's blood droplet would grant him strength that was unrivaled by all those beneath ancient sage, but if he came under the simultaneous assault of 4 experts, it was questionable whether he could really hold his ground or not. He really would have to pay more attention to such matters so as to not fall into such traps again in the future. Humph, you want to play with me? Let's see who will be played with at the very end. Zhong Xian harumphed coldly. Back then, despite his weak cultivation, he had still managed to eliminate the entire Qingtian lineage. Now that he had reached St. Ninden Pinnacle and had Kong Shi's blood droplet with him, he could not possibly allow himself to fare worse than he did back then. Let's enter. Removing the spatial secret art around them, Luo Ruoxin walked up to the space where the 4 men disappeared from previously. Wu Chen walked to her side, and taking a deep breath, he splayed his hand and pressed it downward. Wang. By infusing his energy into the space, just like what the scholarly young man had done previously, a door of light gradually materialized out of nowhere. Wu Chen was the first to enter the door, and he vanished on the spot. Zhong Xian and Luo Ruoxin traded glances before entering the door of light together. With a light buzz, Zhong Xian suddenly found himself standing in the midst of a vast grassland. There was a clear sky, and the surrounding air was crisp and refreshing. With a quick look, it felt as if they had been teleported away instead of entering a folded space. The space in here is really stable, Zhong Xian remarked in astonishment. Even folded spaces on the level of the Qiu Wu Palace were extremely crass in construction, and exertion of excessive strength could easily result in their collapse. On the other hand, the space that they were currently in was extraordinarily stable, such that it made them doubt if they had really entered a folded space. The greater stability of the space only goes to show how dangerous it will be here. I'll first look ahead to scout the path they have taken. As long as we trace their footsteps, we should be able to avoid most of the dangers. Wu Chen clasped his fist. Luo Ruoxin nodded, granting her permission. Wu Chen quickly examined the surroundings. Slowly, a deep frown etched itself onto his forehead. It's very dangerous in here. There are formations and spatial rifts all around, and the slightest misstep could possibly land us in one of those. We need to be. Before Wu Chen could finish his sentence with the word careful, Zhong Xian had already taken a huge stride forward. As he walked, he even beckoned to them leisurely, saying, "Quick, over here. Follow me." You. Taken aback by the young man's reckless action, Wu Chen suddenly felt his heart tightening in anger. What are you doing? Don't you know what kind of treacherous place we are in? I haven't found the path that they have walked in yet. It's very dangerous to be roaming dangerously in here. Just as Wu Chen was about to grab the young man back, he saw Luo Ruoxin following the young man's footsteps without saying a word. "Milady, it's dangerous," Wu Chen exclaimed anxiously. It was one thing for the weak Zhong Xian to not know better, but why would Luo Ruoxin be so rash as well? While Wu Chen was still panicking inside, Luo Ruoxin's voice drifted to his ears. "He has the Eye of Insight. It'll do to follow him." Eye of Insight. The ability that allows one to see through all facade. Wu Chen widened his eyes in astonishment. To possess the Eye of Insight and command such a deep understanding of space. Am I the expert, or is he the expert? Why does it feel like my feeling of superiority as an expert seemed to vanish before the young man? Chapter 1586 Yellow Water of the Netherworld. The trio slowly advanced ahead. As they were following the trail of the group of 4 before them, they did not meet much danger along the way. Those 4 young men did not leave the slightest trail behind when they kidnapped Zhao Ya and the others, which went to show that they had intentionally destroyed all marks of themselves. In this ancient domain, however, perhaps because danger was all around, they could not bother about it anymore, or maybe they felt that no one would be able to follow them there regardless, they had lowered their guard. That being said, their trail was still very faint, to the point of nearly being indiscernible, but fortunately, it was still barely visible through the Eye of Insight. Those 4 are indeed powerful. Zhong Xian thought grimly. If not for his eye of insight improving along with his cultivation, even he would have had trouble making out their nearly indiscernible trail. To be able to do so without intentional concealment, just how powerful would they really be? Most likely, even if they were not on Yang She's level yet, they were not too far from it. If the four of them collaborated with one another, even Yang She would be no match for them. With their cultivation and the element of surprise on their side, it was no wonder Zhao Ya and Wei Ruyan had fallen to them. They are likely notable figures even within the otherworldly demonic tribe. Zhong Xian thought with narrowed eyes. While those of the otherworldly demon tribe were born with greater innate strength and longer lifespans than humans, there was no doubt that only a small handful would be able to reach such a level, which meant that the group of four consisted of the elite of the elites. Otherwise, there was no way mankind would have been able to keep the otherworldly demonic tribe away from the master-teacher continent for so many years. Even if Zhong Xian's group was able to subdue the four of them, chances were that they would sustain severe damage in the process. There are signs of battle ahead. After proceeding ahead for a moment, the adolescent boy Wu Chen suddenly raised his hand to warn the group before walking over alone. Zhong Xian quickly followed behind him, and he swiftly noticed pits of varying sizes and depths all around the area, a sign that an intense battle had just occurred. No, something is wrong. Doubts surfaced in Zhong Xian's eyes as he analyzed the surroundings. While these marks appear to originate from a battle, the fact is that they originate from a single source. In other words, it's the doing of an individual. There are no marks around that suggests that he was facing an opponent. Through the discerning eye of insight, Zhong Xian could tell that despite the chaotic marks all around, they were all inflicted by the zhenqi of a single person. There was no other person to fight with if a battle had truly happened here. Could it be? Luo Ruoxin's eyebrows shot up. A hallucination? There could only be one reason for a person to desperately launch attacks one after another in the presence of no opponent at all. He was in a disorientated state, thus compelling him to make such irrational actions. Such was the case when they entered the Qiu Wu Palace back then. They had immediately been exposed to a demonic tune, which placed them in a poor state of mind. If not for Zhong Xian finding the core of the formation and destroying it, the group would have marched on till they finally died of exhaustion. That does seem to be the case. Wu Chen nodded. Illusory formations blur the distinction between reality and hallucinations, and that could be extremely dangerous in here. Milady, Zhongshe, please wait here for a moment while I find a way to destroy the formation. Be careful. The fact that this formation was able to trap one of those four shows that it's of formidable prowess, Luo Ruoxin warned. I understand. Wu Chen nodded. Gritting his teeth, he began advancing slowly. However, barely after taking 2 steps, he suddenly found Zhong Xian walking right past him before halting at a certain point and stomping his foot forcefully on the ground. Who? The surroundings seemed to waver for a moment, as if something had come undone. Clapping his hands together, Zhong Xian turned around and said, "Job's done. The illusory formation has been dispelled." Wu Chen felt goosebumps rising all over his body. He hurriedly walked forward and extended his spiritual perception to the surroundings before he was able to convince himself that the formation had indeed been deciphered. You! Wu Chen stared at the young man not too far away in frenzy. It was one thing for the young man to be more formidable than him when it came to spatial manipulation and eye of discernment, but to think that the young man would wield such amazing prowess in formations as well. He had not even located where the formation was when the young man was already done deciphering it. How could that be? Was there anything that the young man was incapable of? It was almost as if they had been given the wrong script. He was supposed to be the knowledgeable expert, whereas the young man was the countryside bumpkin. Milady. Wu Chen quickly turned to the young lady behind him, wanting to see her reaction to this matter, only to see a faint smile on her face. It was as if she had known that the young man wielded such capabilities from the very start, and she was not surprised in the least. Seeing that Luo Ruoxin was not saying anything, he did not feel that it would be appropriate for him to comment on the matter. Thus, despite the strange feeling in his heart, he decided to keep his silence and trudge on ahead. This time, the group did not walk too long before a river came into sight. The river water was slightly yellowish and translucent, making it hard to see through it. Looking at it from afar, It did not seem to be flowing either, almost as if it was a still painting. Wu Chen observed it for a while before flicking his wrist to take out a Saint high-tier artifact to toss into the river. Tzzzzzzzzzzzz. A trail of smoke rose from the tip of the weapon, and it did not take long for the Saint high-tier artifact to be completely corroded by the river water, leaving nary a trace at all. Following which, Wu Chen took out a Saint pinnacle artifact and placed it in the river water. In less than 10 breaths, a scorched mark had already appeared on the surface. This is the yellow water of the netherworld. It's highly corrosive, capable of devouring a Saint high-tier artifact within moments. Even Saint pinnacle artifacts won't last too long in it. It's also extremely harmful to cultivators and their zhenqi. If one falls into the water, their primordial spirit will swiftly become corrupted, inflicting irrecoverable damage. Wu Chen said grimly. Yellow water of the netherworld. Zhong Xian frowned. He had read many books, but he had never heard of such a liquid before. UN. It's a natural product of the world, and it's also commonly known as yellow spring water. Even great sage realm cultivators would not dare come into contact with it easily. From the looks of it, we'll have to cross this river in order to advance further in the ancient domain. However, the river corrodes the air directly above it as well, so even flying past the river will be extremely dangerous. Unless... Wu Chen paused for a moment before continuing. Unless we build a Netherworld's bridge. Netherworld's bridge. Zhong Xian was even more confused. Was it not a little troublesome to construct a bridge on the spot? How did the group of 4 ahead of them manage to get past the river then? To cross the Netherworld without falling into it, the Netherworld's bridge is of paramount importance. Most likely, the 4 of them were able to cross because they were aware of the situation in the ancient domain and made preparations in advance, such as bringing along the Netherworld's boat or artifacts of a similar nature, Wu Chen explained. Similar to the Netherworld's bridge, the Netherworld's boat allows one to traverse through the yellow water of the Netherworld freely without falling into it. However, its construction method has long disappeared from the world. Considering how the yellow spring water is able to corrode even Saint pinnacle weapons, does that mean that the Netherworld's boat is a great sage artifact? Zhong Xian asked out of curiosity. In the 3 days that he had spent traveling to the Luo clan, he had conversed at length with Sword Saint Xing and Yangshe, and he had learned much about the higher realms. Saint artifacts were divided into low tier, middle tier, high tier, and pinnacle, and beyond that were great sage artifact. There was no finer distinction to great sage artifacts as most of them had unique properties that would be difficult to classify properly. Nevertheless, depending on how they were forged, there could still be vast differences in their quality. To date, Zhong Xian had yet to see any great sage artifacts, so he was not in a good position to comment either. Since the Netherworld's boat that Wu Chen had mentioned was able to travel through the yellow water of the Netherworld safely, could it possibly be a great sage artifact? Otherwise, how could it withstand the corrosion of the yellow water? You might not believe it when I say this, but it isn't a great sage artifact but simply. Wu Chen shook his head bitterly. Paper. The Netherworld's boat is a type of paper boat. Chapter 1587 Delicious Paper Boat? Zhong Xian was taken aback. Even Saint pinnacle artifacts are unable to withstand the corrosion of the yellow water of the Netherworld, so how could they travel safely through it in a paper boat? The entire matter was simply too unbelievable. Even Saint Nine Dan pinnacle experts would not be able to destroy Saint pinnacle artifacts, and yet, such an artifact could not last long under the corrosion of the yellow water either. On the other hand, even ordinary mortals would be able to tear paper apart, so it was ridiculous to think that a paper boat would be able to float one across the river. To be honest, I don't know either. This is beyond my understanding as well. It's said to be a method that Kongsha came up with back then, but the art has long been lost. It's unlikely for even the Master Teacher Pavilion to have a record on it. Wu Chen shook his head. Doesn't that mean that it'll be impossible for us to cross this river? Zhong Xian frowned. Just by hearing the term, he could already imagine how troublesome it would be to construct the Netherworld's bridge. At the same time, he had no idea how to construct the Netherworld's boat either, so there was nothing more they could do, right? Could they only wait there helplessly? If it was any other occasion, I would still be able to cross the river without much trouble, but without sufficient power and resources on hand at the moment, I fear that there's nothing much I can do," Wu Chen remarked helplessly. "This." Zhong Xian turned his gaze to Luo Ruoxin, only to see the latter shaking her head too. "I do know of some methods that would allow us to cross the river, but with my current strength, it would be a little difficult for me to execute them." "I see. I'll try to think of an alternative solution then," Zhong Xian said. Considering that the group of 4 ahead of them had already crossed the river, if they continued wasting time, it was likely that the master amulet would be gone before they could even set their eyes on it. Thus, after some hesitation, Zhong Xian walked up to the river and placed his hand into the water. "Are you insane?" Seeing the young man touching the water directly with his hand, Wu Chen nearly fainted from shock. Was he tired of living? Wu Chen was just about to rush over to drag the young man away when he saw a bizarre look surfacing on the young man's face. After which, the young man scooped a mouthful of water from the river and licked it with his tongue before gulping it down. A brilliant gleam shone from the young man's eyes as he exclaimed in agitation, "It's actually quite delicious. Come, try some. Try some." Wu Chen nearly fainted on the spot. As the name suggested, the yellow water of the netherworld would send those who dared touch it into the cycle of reincarnation. Yet, not only did that fellow touch it, he even drank it. Did the young man really have to be so tenacious? "Seriously speaking, aren't you over-exaggerating?" Zhong Xian said as he took another mouthful, and a feeling of invigoration consumed his body. It was almost as if he was drinking the nectar of life. The adolescent boy had described the water to be so treacherous that even great sages would avoid it like the plague, but when he touched it, he did not feel any of that at all. He also activated the library of Heaven's Path on it, and it was not as frightening as the adolescent boy had described. Not only was it not dangerous, it was delectable with a nice texture to it. Was this an attempt by the adolescent boy to scare him? Seeing how the young man was completely unaffected by the yellow spring water, not sustaining the slightest damage even when ingesting it directly, Wu Chen could not help but gape at the young man doubtfully. Could he have really made a mistake? As such a thought arose in his mind, he slowly walked over to the river and placed a finger in. Tzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzz. A heart-wrenching pain assaulted him, and he swiftly retracted his hand like a bolt of lightning. Even so, it was already charred black. Had he been even a split instant later, he might have lost his entire finger. Clenching his jaws tightly together to bear through the pain, the adolescent boy took another look at the young man, who was splashing the water around merrily as if a little child, and he felt like bursting into tears. The adolescent boy had absolute confidence in his strength. Even when taking the entire master-teacher continent into consideration, he did not think that there would be anyone who was a match for him. Even so, his finger still swiftly corroded upon contact with the water. Yet the young man was actually completely fine? This was illogical. No, that's not right. There's something wrong with your physical body and soul. Wu Chen widened his eyes in a mixture of realization and astonishment. There's something wrong with my physical body and soul. Zhong Xian stopped his merrymaking and turned a doubtful look toward the adolescent boy. Even though his body had been tempered by the Heaven's Path golden body and was comparable to Saint Pinnacle artifacts, it was still nowhere close to that of great sage Dan sempiternal realm cultivators. Considering how the adolescent boy would challenge even Yang Shi to a battle, it was likely that he had already reached this level. To be honest, he was not really able to make sense out of the bizarre turn of events. I can sense the presence of lightning within your body and soul. It is the lightning energy that's keeping the corrosion of the yellow spring water at bay, Wu Chen said. Lightning. Indeed. The yellow water of the netherworld is hidden deep underground, cold and eerie. On the other hand, lightning is the element of absolute yang, the manifestation of the authority of the heavens. In the face of the heavens, the demons and specters of the netherworld would dare not step out of line, Wu Chen exclaimed in disbelief. But how can your body and soul harness the power of lightning without crumbling? While cultivators would have to face the lightning tribulation from the leaving aperture realm onward, they could only take a passive role in the process, gritting their teeth and praying for the lightning tribulation to be over as soon as possible. There were indeed experts in the world who had successfully cultivated lightning attribute cultivation techniques, but even they were unable to infuse lightning into their very body and soul without sustaining permanent damage. This was especially so for one's soul. Even after metamorphosing into a primordial spirit, it still remained extremely vulnerable to lightning, just like how fire would always remain the nemesis of ice. The young man before him had not reached great sage yet, but his body and soul were charged with the power of lightning. It was this power of lightning that protected him against the corrosion of the yellow spring water. I see. Zhongxian widened his eyes in realization. He had spent his last 2 months absorbing the lightning energy within lightning tribulations in order to achieve breakthroughs, so his body and primordial spirit were already suffused with the power of lightning. If the yellow water of the netherworld was indeed fearful of the power of lightning, it was understandable why he possessed such strong resistance against its corrosion. Since lightning energy is able to oppose the corrosion of the yellow spring water, won't we be able to cross the river easily as long as we summon lightning here? Zhongxian's eyes lit up as an idea crossed his mind. As long as they could summon something that the yellow spring water feared, they would be able to curb it and cross the river with ease. Summon lightning? Hearing those ridiculous words from the young man's mouth, Wu Chen could not help but shake his head in disapproval. You are putting it too lightly. Lightning is the authority of the heavens. While it's possible to summon a lightning tribulation by making a breakthrough, who of us here will be able to make a breakthrough right now? Taking a step back, even if we successfully summon a lightning tribulation here, we will already have our hands full dealing with it, let alone channel its powers to help us cross the river. There were times that the young man displayed incredible acuity for things, seeing through the very nature of things without being restrained by prior ideas. However, there were also times where he seemed like a complete amateur, showing an absolute lack of common sense. Lightning was the retribution that the heavens brought upon cultivators. Just how naive did one have to be to even conjure the notion of using it to cross the river? Seeing that this was what the adolescent boy was worried about, Zhongxian replied with a smirk. Don't worry, that isn't a problem at all. With a flick of his wrist, a saint beast flew forth from his storage ring and circled in the sky, emanating a frightening aura. Netherworld Azure Dragon Beast. I have just checked on it, and the water in here should be able to help you achieve a breakthrough. I'll point out the flaws in your cultivation right now, so use the yellow spring water here to stimulate the acupoints that I mention. With that, you should be able to push for a breakthrough to the next realm. Zhongxian looked at the Netherworld Azure Dragon Beast flying above him and issued his instructions. The Netherworld Azure Dragon Beast harnessed the cold attribute of the Netherworld, too. Absorbing spiritual energy of a similar attribute to it would help to accelerate its cultivation, and the yellow water of the Netherworld happened to be one such source. While the corrosion would also deal significant damage to it, as long as it was utilized carefully, it could potentially achieve unexpected effects. Perhaps, it might even successfully push for a breakthrough to Great Sage. Chapter 1588 Offering Pointers to the Lightning Tribulation. The Great Sage Realm is the greatest hurdle for saint cultivators. It's like bridging the gap between the earth and the heavens for human cultivators, and even more so for saint beasts. Without a sufficiently pure bloodline, it's impossible to succeed. Yet, you want it to achieve a breakthrough on the spot and summon a lightning tribulation? Are you actually serious about this? Wu Chen was beyond frenzied. It was as if the lad was jumping from one impossibility to the next. If it was that easy to make a breakthrough to Great Sage, there would not be so many cultivators who departed the world with regrets due to being unable to take the final step forward. And the case was much worse for saint beasts. The requirement on their bloodline was extremely strict, so most saint beasts would require further refinement of their bloodline before they could advance their cultivation. However, to use the yellow water of the netherworld to refine its bloodline? To think that the lad could even think of something as ridiculous as that. Wu Chen turned to look at Luo Ruoxin, hoping that she would talk the young man out of his futile pursuit. Contrary to his expectations, she simply looked at the situation with a calm smile, not finding the young man's actions nonsensical at all. In fact, her demeanor seemed to suggest strong confidence in the young man. Even after he suggested something so ridiculous, Luo Ruoxin still trusted that fellow. Gritting his teeth furiously, he turned his gaze back to the young man and saw that the latter had already gotten to work. The young man had taken out many swords and placed them together from end to end, forming a straight line. After which, the young man tied the netherworld azure dragon beast on it with junchy treads. From afar, it really looked like a skewer. After all was ready, the young man placed his hand into the river and scooped up the water. Tzzzzzzzzzzzz. The yellow water of the netherworld was sprinkled on the netherworld azure dragon beast, and charred marks of corrosion swiftly appeared on its scales. Hi, just what heinous sins did the netherworld azure dragon beast commit in its previous life to become this fellow's tamed beast? This is not helping it advance its cultivation but kill it. Wu Chen could not help but shake his head. The netherworld azure dragon beast seemed to trust Zhong Xian deeply, but the price of its trust turned out to be being corroded to death by the yellow water of the netherworld. It sure was unlucky. Sighing deeply, Wu Chen could not bring himself to watch on any longer. Just as he was about to avert his gaze, perhaps because watching his tamed beast being corroded by the yellow spring water was not enough to satisfy his depraved urges, the young man took out another dozen swords and plunged them right into the body of the netherworld azure dragon beast. However, as soon as the swords were plunged in, the yellow spring water began seeping into the netherworld azure dragon beast's body, and something seemed to have been stimulated. The Saint Nine Dan beast began writhing intensely, and a moment later, devastating might suddenly burst forth from its body. It seemed as if its bloodline had been filtered by the yellow spring water in an instant, raising its purity to a new level. Not only so, its body had also been tempered, and in the blink of an eye, its cultivation was already surging toward the level of the introspective convalescence realm. Hong long long. A deep rumble echoed as innumerable storm clouds slowly gathered overhead, carrying a might that could tear even space apart. He really managed to summon a lightning tribulation. Wu Chen's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets, and he tore out clump after clump of his hair. He had thought that it was utter nonsense, but the young man really had helped the netherworld azure dragon beast achieve a breakthrough and summon the lightning tribulation. To think that there was a breakthrough method that would require one being tied up like a skewer, lubricated, and pierced. His eyes had truly been opened that day. Then again, what use was summoning the lightning tribulation? It was not as if they could use it to cross the river. Wu Chen turned a doubtful gaze over, wanting to see what the young man would do next, only to see the young man directing an amicable smile toward the ominous clouds in the sky. Little Lei, you are finally here. Come to your brother Xian's side. I need you to bring us across the river. Boom! The lightning tribulation in the air quivered a little as an aggrieved rumble echoed within it. However, after a moment of hesitation, a surge of lightning still streaked across the air, forming a massive tangible bridge. Let's go, Zhong Xian said. He moved the netherworld azure dragon beast back into his myriad anthive nest to have it slowly comprehend the strength that it had just gained before stepping onto the bridge of lightning, taking huge strides toward the other end of the river. There's actually such a method. Wu Chen was completely stumped. He had seen cultivators taming beasts, taming weapons, and even taming humans. However, he had never seen anyone taming the lightning tribulation before. This sight had really overturned what he had deemed to be possible and impossible. Let's go. Just as Wu Chen was shocked beyond words, he heard Luo Ruoxin's voice by the side. Following which, he saw her stepping onto the bridge of lightning as well, slowly making her way over to the opposite end. Forget it, there's no point thinking too much into it at the moment. Seeing that the two of them were moving far ahead, Wu Chen knew that this was not the time for him to get shocked, so he quickly followed along as well. Countless volts of blue lightning crackled wildly beneath his feet, but unlike ordinary lightning tribulations, it did not deal the slightest damage to him. Instead, it felt warm and nourishing. With the presence of the lightning, the yellow water of the netherworld beneath dared not run rampant, so it could only lie there peacefully. It should have been impossible for them to cross the river without the netherworld's bridge or netherworld's boat, but who would have thought that they would actually be able to pull it off in such an inconceivable manner? He really could not help but wonder if it was all a dream. He had come into contact with innumerable top-notch master teachers, and many of them were extremely talented individuals. However, none of them would be able to achieve this feat in fact, Even Kong Shi would not have been able to do so. It did not take long for the trio to reach the opposite shore of the river. After they got down from the Bridge of Lightning, Zhongxian turned around and smiled. You should return for now. I'll look for you the next time I need you. Right, I realized that you made a lot of mistakes when you gathered your lightning energy together earlier, resulting in the rate of gathering being needlessly slow and its final output being diminished. If you have time, feel free to look for me. I'll give you some pointers to help you improve yourself. Boom. The thunder seemed to rumble with a quaver, seemingly unable to believe what it had just heard. It was actually possible for it to improve itself too? Seemingly seeing through its doubts, Zhongxian placed his hands behind his back and nodded. You have a total of 7 flaws. Listen to my words obediently, and I'll reveal these flaws to you along with the method to correct them slowly over time. How embarrassing it was for him to trouble little Leilei each and every time. Earlier, when the storm clouds began gathering, he had observed the process carefully using the Library of Heaven's Path and found that there were many flaws in the process. Thus, he could make it up to little Leilei by offering it some guidance when he was free. Boom. Upon hearing those words, the lightning tribulation rumbled excitedly before slowly dissipating before everyone's eyes. It actually heeds your command. Furthermore, you are able to lecture it. Seeing that the lightning tribulation had really left like an obedient child, Wu Chen clutched his hair in frenzy. Yuan, it's a good kid. Zhongxian nodded. Good kid. Wu Chen nearly spurted a mouthful of blood. The lightning tribulation had always been the nemesis of cultivators. Every year, countless cultivators would die in its hands, making it their object of fear. This was the very first time that he had heard someone describing the lightning tribulation as a good kid. If word were to spread, the cultivators of the world would go insane. If even the lightning tribulation could be obedient, was there anything in the world that could not be obedient? If the lightning tribulation has no flaws and is able to gather even faster, won't that mean that there will be even more cultivators dying from it? Wu Chen could not help but voice the question on his mind. Putting aside how the fellow was able to make the lightning tribulation heed his orders, more importantly, if he was really able to correct its flaws and make it grow stronger, would the lightning tribulations for human cultivators not become harder? The death toll was already as high as it was. If the lightning tribulation grew any stronger, who would dare cultivate in the future? Don't worry, I'll teach it ways to exploit the flaws of the otherworldly demonic tribe so that it will only strike down otherworldly demons in the future. I'm pretty free at the moment anyway. Zhongxian replied with a shrug. You. Not expecting the young man to be so shameless, Wu Chen felt his hair standing on end. Just as he was about to say something, Luo Ruoxin's voice suddenly sounded. Look. Zhongxian and Wu Chen quickly turned their heads over, and they swiftly noticed that a palace was floating quietly in the air not too far away. Considering how the distance between them and the palace was just 20 li, it should be much easier than before. The theory behind traveling through spatial wormholes is somewhat similar to that of teleportation formations. You're not wrong in saying that we would be able to leap past the dimensional sand, but the problem is that dimensional sand is not stable in the first place. If we attempt to travel across it using a spatial art, I fear that it might create spatial turbulence. While this folded space is unexpectedly stable, I don't think it would be wise to try its resilience against spatial turbulence, Luo Ruoxin replied with a deep frown. Even an introspective convalescence realm cultivator would have trouble surviving in spatial turbulence, so attempting to leap over it would be extremely dangerous to Zhongxian. Furthermore, it could lead to instability in the folded space that they were in, and that could potentially lead to many undesired outcomes. So, is there no way for us to get past it? Zhongxian frowned. It was impossible to fly over it, and spatial leaps were too dangerous to be utilized. The palace was right in front of their eyes. Was there really no way for them to get over there? That isn't necessarily the case. As long as we are able to hold the dimensional sand still like they did, we should be able to travel through it easily, Luo Ruoxin said. Hold the dimensional sand still? As Zhongxian asked, his gaze instinctively drifted over to Wu Chen. The adolescent boy's comprehension of space was on par with even the experts of the Luo clan. Perhaps, He might have a solution to the quandary that they were in. Sensing Zhongxian's gaze on him, Wu Chen shook his head. If I had the Luo clan's dimensional silencer, I might still be able to pull it off. However, I fear that I won't be able to do so in my current state. Dimensional silencer? It's a treasure that the founder of the Luo clan found by chance. It wields the ability to hold space still and calm spatial turbulences. The dimensional sand in front of us is difficult to deal with, but with the dimensional silencer, we would be able to halt its flow directly, Wu Chen said with a nod of his head. The dimensional silencer is so formidable. Zhongxian widened his eyes in astonishment. He had long heard that the little princess of the Luo clan, together with her dimensional silencer, wielded frightening prowess that would strike fear in the hearts of any cultivator. However, he had not sparred with her before, and deep within his heart, he still regarded her as the innocent and courteous little lass who addressed him as her teacher. He had never really thought that the dimensional silencer would actually be so formidable. The dimensional silencer is a formidable artifact, and from the feeling I get, Luo Chichi is still far from unlocking its true prowess, Luo Ruoxin remarked with a nod. However, there's no point talking about this right now. The dimensional silencer isn't here, and even if we were to head out to fetch it right now, we wouldn't make it back in time. That's true. Zhongxian nodded helplessly. As powerful as the dimensional silencer was, they did not have it with them at the moment. Furthermore, after the deep wound that he had dealt to Luo Chichi's heart, no matter how thick-skinned he was, he could not possibly bring himself to head to the Luo clan and borrow their guardian artifact. Speaking of the dimensional silencer, an idea suddenly came into my mind. If we were to... No, that wouldn't work either. Never mind. Wu Chen suddenly interjected, but halfway through his words, a bitter smile broke out of his face, and he shook his head. Zhongxian turned his gaze over and asked, "Feel free to voice of any ideas you have in mind. We might be able to build on them to derive a feasible solution." Actually, the Luo clan and ancient sage Qiu Wu's comprehension of space are derived from the dimensional silencer. As such, the quintessence of their spatial heritage lay in sealing and stabilizing space. If any of us are able to comprehend it, we will be able to halt the flow of the dimensional sand and easily fly across it, Wu Chen said. However, spatial quintessence is much harder to grasp than other quintessences. It took me countless years to achieve my current understanding of space, and I had to browse through innumerable ancient texts before I finally succeeded. Hearing those words, Zhongxian suddenly recalled a matter and asked, "If I divide space by the levels of compress, traverse, control, creation, and destruction, which realm would I have to reach in order to comprehend the spatial quintessence of the Luo clan? If you were to divide it by those levels..." Wu Chen pondered for a moment before replying, "You should be able to comprehend the Luo clan's spatial quintessence by reaching the fourth level, which is the level of creation." The fourth level? Those words made Zhongxian's eyes light up in agitation, and his lips crept up confidently. With a heated look in his eyes, he asked, "You mentioned earlier that you have many ancient books concerning space. Do you, by any chance, have them with you? I would like to browse them." Chapter 1594 Dan Heavenly Art of Dimension Unravel. You want to read right now? Wu Chen was stunned to hear those words. He could not figure out what the young man was up to. Everyone is discussing how to escape from the dimensional sand and enter the palace in order to find the celestial amulet of legacy, but at this crucial moment, you are telling us that you want to read books. Can you propose anything more inappropriate for the situation than that? Zhongshe, we are currently in a tough spot. We can't get to the palace, and there's no place for us to retreat to either. Why don't we discuss how we should proceed from here on instead? Wu Chen advised awkwardly. To be honest, if not for the fact that Luo Ruoxin liked this fellow, he would have already killed him with one crisp slap. The least you can do is get your priorities straight, right? I said that in order to get us out of this situation, Zhongxian said. I have seen the Luo clan using their bloodline ability and their spatial secret arts. As long as you give me the books that you have concerning space, I think I might just be able to derive a similar cultivation technique, comprehend spatial quintessence, and resolve the current situation. You want to cultivate right now? Wu Chen nearly spurted blood. So, that was what the fellow was thinking of. He sure knew how to daydream. Suppressing his overflowing rage, Wu Chen took in a deep breath to calm himself down before saying, "Zhongshe, I know that you are a man of great talent, but spatial laws are the most difficult set of laws to grasp among the various laws of the world. This is even more so for the spatial quintessence of sealing space. Countless geniuses have devoted their lives to exploring this field of study, only to make no progress. I'm afraid that it might be too late for you to start cultivating right now. If it was that easy to grasp spatial laws, the Luo clan would not enjoy such prestige on the master-teacher continent. To only be thinking of studying after you are trapped. Do you think that spatial quintessences are like cabbages by the road, ready to be picked whenever you need one?" Just as Wu Chen was about to continue speaking, he suddenly heard Luo Ruoxin's slightly displeased voice sounding by the side. Since Zhong Xian has said so, he must have his considerations in mind. "Pass him the books." "Yes, milady." Since Luo Ruoxin had already spoken, Wu Chen did not dare complain anymore. Thus, with a flick of his wrist, he took out the massive collection of books that he had gathered over the years. Piled on top of one another, they resembled a mini mountain. As he took out those books, he could not help but grumble in his heart, "I really wonder what kind of spell that fellow has cast over milady for her to trust him so much." Oblivious to Wu Chen's internal thoughts, Zhong Xian swiftly scanned through the books and collected them into the library of Heaven's Path. As he compiled them together with the heavenly art of dimension unravel in his head, he casually picked up one of the books from the pile and began flipping through it as a cover. Unfortunately, the book that he had picked up on a whim only drove Wu Chen's mind into greater turmoil, and he nearly spurted blood. That was because written on the cover of the book were the words "Spatial Laws for Dummies." To be reading the bare basics of spatial laws right now. I will have already died of old age by the time you comprehend spatial quintessence. But as stifled as Wu Chen was, with Luo Ruoxin backing Zhong Xian, he had no choice but to suppress his fury. On the other hand, as he flipped through the spatial laws of dummies, his consciousness was actually already within the library of Heaven's Path. Previously, when he compiled the various manuals that Wu Chen had given him with the heavenly art of dimension unravel, he had already managed to remove quite a number of its flaws. With the hulking number of books that he had right now, he successfully perfected the 4-dan heavenly art of dimension unravel, bringing it to the level of Heaven's Path. The level of creation is centered around the concept of creating stable folded space. If one is able to create space, it goes without saying that one will be able to stabilize existing spaces as well. Allowing the content of the book to flow through his head, Zhong Xian slowly closed his eyes. The 5 levels of the heavenly art of dimension unravel were namely compress, traverse, control, creation, and destruction. His initial thought upon seeing them was that ancient sage Qiu Wu had gotten the levels wrong. Typically speaking, one should comprehend the notion of destruction before comprehending creation, right? However, as he began to understand the crux of creation in the heavenly art of dimension unravel, he realized that there was not any mistake at all. The level of creation did entail the idea of creating new space, but it was limited to creating small folded spaces rather than naturally stable spaces like the master-teacher continent. On the other hand, destruction was at a different level. It was about tearing through space to achieve true freedom. To put it in simpler terms, a cultivator who had comprehended destruction would not only be able to traverse freely with their soul, even their body would be able to tread through space freely. Only upon reaching that realm would one be considered to have reached the pinnacle of space, achieving true freedom and strength. However, it would be incredibly difficult to reach such a realm. Even ancient sage Qiu Wu only had a partial understanding as to what destruction consisted of when he left the heavenly art of dimension unravel behind, having yet to reach the level of major accomplishment. Fortunately, Zhong Xian did not need to cultivate up to the 5th level. Just the 4th level would suffice to get them out of the current quandary that they were in. Taking in a deep breath, Zhong Xian went through the 4-dan heavenly art of dimension unravel once more before starting his cultivation. Jeji, Jeji. The energy in his body began circulating in a unique pathway, and in an instant, his meridians and zhenqi seemed to have disappeared within a sealed space, making it impossible for one to sense them anymore. I see. Sensing the changes in his body, Zhongxian immediately widened his eyes in enlightenment. While Zhongxian had stopped after cultivating the heavenly art of dimension unravel up to 3 Dan, his understanding of space had still gradually grown deeper and deeper as he raised his cultivation. Of course, the deepening understanding of spatial laws as a result of the advancement of his cultivation was different from what he learned in the heavenly art of dimension unravel, but the two branches of knowledge did complement one another. The epiphany that had struck him induced greater clarity in his consciousness, allowing him to perceive the very foundations of space. Complete spaces are like parts of a honeycomb fitted together, fixed in structure. Even if an object falls on it, there won't be much of a change to its structure. It's such a property that allows one to move through space. On the other hand, dimensional sand is similar to quicksand in nature. As soon as it encounters any external force, it will swiftly pull the foreign object in, preventing it from advancing any further. This deepening in comprehension of the nature of space also allowed Zhongxian to see through dimensional sand for what it really was. The reason a space could be stable was because it was built up by countless smaller blocks placed over one another, similar to wooden sheets stacked over one another like a sandwich panel. Dimensional sand was essentially bits of space scattered loosely around the place, and traveling across it was like attempting to walk across water. There was simply no solid ground for one to step on. One had to first stabilize the dimensional sand in place first before traversing across it. While Zhongxian was comprehending the 3 Dan heavenly art of dimension unravel, Wu Chen was shaking his head grimly. "Milady, it isn't a solution to wait on like this. Those men have already gotten into the main hall. If they obtain the master amulet, there won't be anything more we can do. Do you have any other idea in mind other than waiting?" Luo Ruoxin glanced at Wu Chen leisurely, showing no anxiety at all. "If it really comes down to it, why don't I?" Wu Chen gritted his teeth and suggested. "No, that will alarm more people and complicate the situation." Luo Ruoxin shook her head. "Don't worry and put your trust in Zhongxian. Since he says that he has an idea in mind, he'll surely find a way through." "Put my trust in him." Wu Chen was rendered speechless by Luo Ruoxin's blind trust. He has only begun to learn spatial arts, and the book that he picked up was the most elementary one. Who knows how many years it will take him to comprehend the spatial quintessence? By then, it will already be too late. Who? Before Wu Chen could finish his words, a slight breeze blew across his face. A breeze? How could there be a breeze coming from the dimensional sand? Wu Chen widened his eyes in astonishment. Under normal circumstances, even if one fanned as hard as one could, it would not raise the slightest draft amid the dimensional sand. So, how could there suddenly be an air current coming from the dimensional sand? Hong long long. Before Wu Chen could make sense out of what was happening, he suddenly felt the space around him tremoring intensely. Spiritual energy converged furiously toward the young man before him. The next instant, the young man opened his eyes, and a light smile crept onto his lips. Freeze. With a resounding bellow, the scattered dimensional sand suddenly froze in place. Chapter 1591. The excited deputy clan head of the Luo clan. This. Wu Chen nearly burst into tears. It was just a moment ago that he had thought that he would have already withered away like an aged flower by the time the young man comprehended spatial quintessence, but before he knew it, the young man was already freezing the dimensional sand in place. Did the young man really have to be so fast? In this moment, Wu Chen felt a stinging pain on his face. If there was a hole in the ground, he would have dived right in out of embarrassment. He was an expert. An expert. An expert. But in less than half a day after coming to know Zhongshe, he had already been slapped 3 times in the face, and each time, it left him dizzy with disbelief. He had thought that since the young man was proficient in one field, he was bound to be weaker in another. Yet, as the facts had shown time and time again, the young man was strong in every respect. It was as if the concept of weakness did not apply to him at all. Each time he doubted the young man, the situation would turn on him and leave him too embarrassed to meet anyone. Just that, how did the young man do it? Did he really just comprehend spatial quintessence by reading an elementary book on spatial arts? Could it be that the key to spatial arts actually lay in the bare foundations? So, All of the secrets were actually contained within that elementary manual. It seemed like he would really have to study it carefully in the future. Perhaps, he might just be able to comprehend something from it and improve. Unaware of the adolescent boy's inner thoughts, Zhongxian casually tossed the book in his hand back into the pile before calmly announcing, "I have dealt with the dimensional sand. We can move on now." Yuan Luo Ruoxin nodded with a smile before heading for the palace. Wu Chen picked up the book that Zhongxian had been reading previously and stared at it meaningfully. In the past, he would not even have spared a second glance at a book of this caliber, but in that moment, he could not even bear to grab the book too tightly, fearing that he would make the slightest dent on this unparalleled secret manual and hinder the progression of his fighting prowess. In the Luo clan, 2 ordinary disciples were currently walking toward the ancestral hall, where the tablets of founder Luo Yuntian and countless other predecessors were placed. These 2 disciples were on duty, and they had to clean the ancestral hall, offer incense sticks, and conduct the routine rituals to honor the predecessors. "We have really embarrassed ourselves today. It'll be hard for the Luo clan to make a comeback after this." The green-robed disciple walking on the left grumbled with a shake of his head. "When has our Luo clan suffered such humiliation since its founding?" The gray-robed disciple on the right replied. "What's even more infuriating is that our clan head doesn't pay any heed to the matter despite being rejected publicly." The green-robed disciple sighed in frustration. "If she's unwilling to make a stand, what can the rest of us do?" The gray-robed disciple harumphed. "She isn't our clan head yet. The inauguration ceremony hasn't been conducted, remember? It was only put off due to the engagement. If not for the engagement, given her bloodline and control over the Dimension Silencer, she would have already become the clan head ages ago," the green-robed disciple said. "But after seeing how she dealt with the humiliation we suffered earlier, I really can't bear to think what will become of the Luo clan under her leadership." The gray-robed disciple sighed. "Even if the Luo clan declines under her leadership, there's nothing we can do about it." The green-robed disciple sighed. "It's not as if you are unaware of our clan rules. Only those whose bloodline has reached a certain level of purity can become the clan head, but there's no one other than her who has reached the mark, unless someone who has comprehended our ancestors' spatial quintessence appears, but in the past tens of thousands of years, no one has been able to achieve that. So, it's only a matter of time before she becomes the clan head. We can't possibly go against the teachings of our predecessors over this one single matter. I know that, too, but I really can't stand. What's happening?" Halfway through his words, the gray-robed disciple was suddenly disrupted by intense tremors beneath his feet. "It's coming from the ancestral hall. Quick, let's head over to take a look." Sensing that the tremors had originated from the ancestral hall right ahead of them, the face of the green-robed disciple warped in horror as he quickly dashed toward it. The gray-robed disciple swiftly followed suit. As soon as they entered the room, they were left in a daze by what they were seeing. The sculptures of their founder, Luo Yuntian, had turned toward the doorway, where they were standing, gazing deeply into the distance. With a slight smile on his lips, he clasped his fist and conducted a ceremonial greeting toward a fellow peer. At the same time, the many ancestral tablets behind him also seemed to bow down deferentially, as if standing in the face of a superior, not daring to look up at all. At the same time, the 2 characters that founder Luo Yuntian had left behind, silence and space, were shaking non-stop, as if they would break out of the wall at any moment. The tremors that they had experienced outside had originated from those 2 characters. Could it be that our founder has come back to life? The green-robed disciple muttered in a daze. Founder Luo Yuntian passed on countless years ago, so how could he possibly have come back to life? The gray-robed disciple was much calmer in the face of this unexpected turn of events, but even so, he was unable to make sense of the situation. "I'm not too sure what's going on here, but something huge must have happened." Chapter 1592 Golden Warriors of Mentor's Calligraphy. Yes. Upon hearing the commands, the elders quickly nodded before scattering. Comprehending the spatial quintessence of sealing would mean reaching the very peak of spatial arts. With such an expert among them, there was no one who would be able to stop the Luo clan's rise to power. They would also be able to get back at the Zhong clan for the humiliation that they had suffered as a result of the rejection earlier. With this, they would let the world know how foolish it was for Zhongxian to have rejected the Luo clan. Zhongxian, you probably couldn't have imagined that someone in our Luo clan would make a breakthrough so swiftly after your rejection, Luo Ganzhen uttered as his eyes turned cold. Wait till we find this person and establish him as the clan head. I'll surely return this humiliation to you twofold. A person who had comprehended the spatial quintessence of sealing would have already grasped the very crux of the Luo clan's heritage. As long as that person's cultivation got up to par, the young prodigy of the Zhong clan would not mean anything at all. Indeed, I won't be able to quench my hatred if I don't slice that be *starred in two. Luo Shenqing spat furiously. He had thought of the young man as his good friend, but the young man had actually trampled on his younger sister as if she was nothing at all. It did not take long for the elders who had scattered to return once more. Reporting to the deputy clan head, we have checked all of the experts at the macrocosm ascendancy realm within the clan, but none of them have comprehended the spatial quintessence of sealing. Reporting to the deputy clan head, none of the members at the dimension sundering realm have comprehended the spatial quintessence of sealing. The elders swiftly revealed the results of their findings, and disappointed looks surfaced all around the room. The fact that even the founder had paid his respects was more than enough to show that someone had comprehended the spatial quintessence of sealing. There could not possibly be any mistake there. However, they had asked all of the cultivators in the clan, and none of them had noticed any peculiar phenomenon that could have suggested a breakthrough. This was truly baffling. There was nothing. How could there be nothing? Spatial laws have always been incredibly difficult to comprehend, and this is especially so when it comes to sealing space. Without the Luo clan's bloodline and heritage, it would be difficult for one to even grasp the bare basics. Luo Ganzhen could hardly believe the outcome of the investigation. Even founder Luo Tianyun had only succeeded in comprehending it due to him acquiring the dimension silencer and stumbling upon ancient sage Qiu Wu's heritage by a stroke of luck. If the person who had comprehended the spatial quintessence of sealing was not a person from their clan, who else could it be? We have even checked on the cultivators who have gone into seclusion. Could that person really not be from the Luo clan? Luo Qingchen asked with a deep frown. If the person was from the Luo clan, they would surely understand what it meant to comprehend the spatial quintessence of sealing. Even without them looking around for the person, they would surely appear before the elders of their own accord. However, no one was stepping forth at all. All of the evidence seemed to suggest that the person was not from the Luo clan. Look into it right now, we have to find that person. Regardless of the means, we have to get them into the Luo clan, even if it means locking them down by. Luo Ganzhen's eyes narrowed. Marriage. Marriage? Luo Shenqing was taken aback. That's right. The fact that that person has comprehended the spatial quintessence of sealing means that all of the Luo clan's secret arts no longer hold any secret to them. If that person becomes our enemy, the Luo clan would be doomed. Thus, no matter what condition we have to offer them, we have to get them into our clan. Even if they want to marry your younger sister, we can only allow it. Luo Ganzhen waved his hand decisively. No, but that. Hearing those words, Luo Xuanqing's eyes widened in horror. This matter is not open for discussion. There's already no hope between Zhongxian and your younger sister, and since that's the case, we might as well find someone who has comprehended the spatial quintessence of sealing. This way, we will be able to get vengeance on the Zhong clan. We'll tell the world that our Luo clan will be able to stand at the very pinnacle without relying on anyone. Luo Ganzhen spat coldly. Hearing those words, Luo Shenqing stared at his father with a complicated look in his eyes. He did want to get vengeance on Zhongxian and the Zhong clan as well, and he would be able to do so if they could get that person who had comprehended the spatial quintessence of sealing on their side. At the same time, the Luo clan would be able to recover its dignity. But after what had happened during the wedding, he could not bear to watch his younger sister being sacrificed again. Once was enough. All right, this matter is settled. Hurry up and dispatch our men to search for that person. Once that person has been found, report to me immediately. I'll personally pay that person a visit. Luo Ganzhen flung his sleeves imposingly. Yes. The elders hurriedly scattered into the area. Without the dimensional sand to block their path, the trio was able to advance ahead swiftly. Soon, they stopped at the entrance of the palace. Zhongxian raised his head and looked beyond the towering stairs in front of him. On both sides of the entrance gate were two rock sculptures shaped in the fashion of adolescent boys. They were dressed in rather ancient-looking clothes and sported long hair. They were bent into a bow, seemingly paying respects to the visitors of the palace. There was a plaque above the entrance with 3 massive words written on it. It carried a sharp aura that felt reminiscent of a spear piercing in one's direction, threatening to tear intruders into shreds. It was a rather bizarre pairing, the respectfulness of the bowing adolescent boys and the menacing words on the plaque. Ranzi Hall. Wu Chen read out loud. It seems to have been personally written by ancient sage Ran Qiu, Zhongxian remarked with a nod. Looking at it from the perspective of a painter, those 3 words could not be considered to be too skillful. Nevertheless, it had a high and lofty conception that even someone of Zhongxian's eye of discernment was not able to see through. It was hard to imagine that it had come from a hand other than that of ancient sage Ran Qiu. Shaking his head, Zhongxian bowed deeply to both of the adolescent boys and the plaque at the center. Attainment, solidarity, propriety, erudition, and integrity. The fact that propriety was placed before erudition and integrity showed how much Kongsha valued this trait. Since they were in the ancient domain of one of his direct disciples, it was best for them not to forget their etiquette. Right after paying his respects, there was a slight tremor. The adolescent boy sculpture on the left slowly opened his eyes before looking upon them with a smile. Guests of the Ranzi Hall, I applaud you for having come this far. Unfortunately, I have to inform you that you have yet to earn the right to enter the Ranzi Hall yet. If you wish to enter it, you will have to clear the trial, the adolescent boy sculpture said. May I know what trial it is? Zhongxian asked as he clasped his fist. Ancient sage Ran Qiu has never liked excessive formalities, so the trial that he has set is very simple as well. You'll have to challenge one of our warriors of strength equaling yours, and if you are able to achieve victory, you will be granted passageway. Otherwise, I'll have to ask of you to turn around and leave, the adolescent boy sculpture said as he raised his palm. Voila! The 3 massive words on the plaque abruptly fell onto the ground, and with a slight waver, they warped into 3 identical-looking golden-armored soldiers. This. Zhongxian widened his eyes in astonishment. With his eye of discernment, he could tell that those 3 soldiers were not any kind of special artifact but true embodiments of the words on the plaque. They carried the same strikingly sharp aura as the words on the plaque, sending shivers down one's spine. Noting the look of bewilderment on Zhongxian's face, Luo Ruoxin explained, "These are golden warriors of Mentor's calligraphy." Golden warriors of Mentor's calligraphy? Zhongxian asked in confusion. He had heard of impartation of heaven's will and heart of teacher, but he had never heard of golden warriors of Mentor's calligraphy before. Legend has it that powerful master teachers are able to retain their own spirit and psyche in the form of words. Under specific conditions, these words will transform into golden warriors to battle with others, Luo Ruoxin explained. As these golden warriors are the manifestation of the master teacher's spirit and psyche, they possess the master teacher's fighting instinct and moves, thus making them formidable foes. Possess the master teacher's fighting instincts and moves. Since these words were left behind by ancient sage Ran Qiu, doesn't that mean that these golden warriors possess his fighting prowess? Zhongxian narrowed his eyes in shock. Chapter 1593 Wu Chen's terrifying strength. Ancient sage Ran Qiu was reputed to be Kongsha's strongest direct disciple, so naturally, his strength was not to be underestimated. If these golden warriors really possessed his fighting instincts and moves, it would be nigh impossible for those of the same realm to defeat them. Actually, it isn't as exaggerated as that. While the golden warriors do possess the battle instincts of the master teacher behind the calligraphy, the circumstances in battle are ever-changing. The slightest lapse in response can create the largest difference in the results of the battle. It would be amazing if the golden warriors could wield even half of ancient sage Ran Qiu's true strength, Luo Ruoxin remarked with a light chuckle. In the end, even if the calligraphy was infused with ancient sage Ran Qiu's will and psyche, it was ultimately just a couple of characters. It was not really as fearsome as it sounded. "You're right." Zhong Xian nodded. "Who should go first?" "Allow me." Wu Chen stepped forward and volunteered himself. "Allow me to pave the way forward for Milady and Zhongshe." "Yuan." Zhong Xian nodded. While Wu Chen might have appeared to only be a 13 to 14-year-old adolescent boy on the surface, the strength he had displayed so far was completely unlike what Zhong Xian had seen before, so he did not think that there was anything to worry about. Instead, this would be a good chance to see what those golden warriors of Mentor's calligraphy were capable of. "Let's begin." Seeing that someone had stepped out, the adolescent boy sculptor nodded, and the Ranward golden warrior walked over with widened strides. Its body shuddered a little before its aura began surging right to the level of the great sage realm, equivalent to that of Wu Chen. "Formidable." Zhong Xian nodded in awe. For calligraphy to be able to raise its cultivation and fight like a human, he never would have believed such a thing to be possible if he had not seen it with his own eyes. It was no wonder the clans would go fight desperately just to obtain a small scroll of Kong Shi's personal writing. It seemed like every single word of an ancient sage wielded extraordinary capabilities. Hula. After raising its strength to Wu Chen's level, it whipped out a spear and thrust it toward Wu Chen without any hesitation. Even while the spear was bolting for Wu Chen's heart, it tore a rift through space in its path, exhibiting the frightening might infused into this thrust. What impressive spearmanship! Zhong Xian clenched his fists excitedly. The skills of a true expert would show even in a simple thrust. As the one who had imparted his spearmanship to Zheng Yang, it went without saying that Zhong Xian's mastery of the spear had reached a truly profound level. Admittedly, the spearmanship of the Golden Warrior was not as simple and effective as his, but it had still managed to capture the crux of spearmanship. Its sharpness was keenly directed to seal its opponent's movements and will, thus making it extremely difficult to withstand or escape from. Naturally, Wu Chen also noticed the dangers behind the spear thrust, and he chuckled softly. "Good move." That being said, instead of dodging the spear thrust, he raised his finger and directed it right toward the spear tip, seemingly intending to face the Golden Warrior's attack straight on. Under normal circumstances, facing a spear with one's finger was a foolproof method to win a date with death, but Wu Chen had channeled a revolving sphere of energy at his fingertip. If the spear tip really came into contact with this sphere, it would swiftly plunge the attack into the midst of a spatial turbulence, thus creating an opportunity for Wu Chen to turn the tables on the Golden Warrior. Perhaps the Golden Warrior had instinctively sensed danger from Wu Chen's revolving sphere of energy, but without the slightest emotion on its face, it raised its spear abruptly. This transformation in moves did not have the slightest hint of hesitation or delay in it, as if the earlier thrust was only a feint, and this was the real killer move. To be able to switch from one move to another so swiftly was definitely not an easy task. Even for Zhong Xian, it would take quite some effort. Truly impressive. Just this transformation grants the attack a third of my strength. Zhong Xian could not help but compliment. With the library of Heaven's Path and Eye of Insight, he was able to easily see through the flaws of the opponent's moves. As such, if he proclaimed himself the number 2 in executing offensive transformations, no one would dare declare themselves number 1. The fact that the Golden Warriors, who were solely made out of words, could wield a third of his true strength was already quite a terrifying feat here. Taken aback by the transformation in the Golden Warrior's spear art, Wu Chen harumphed coldly as he bent his finger downward and flicked it. Wang! A burst of sword chi surged forth from the tip of his finger and struck the Golden Warrior's spear, inducing a metallic clang. The spear was immediately sent flying from the Golden Warrior's hand. Deng 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 deng. At the same time, the Golden Warrior was forced to retreat 4 steps before its body abruptly dissolved like flowing water, transforming back into the Ranward before flying back into the plaque. Incredible. Zhong Xian looked at Wu Chen with narrowed eyes. In terms of individual fighting prowess, this Golden Warrior would be stronger than even Zheng Yang, yet Wu Chen had achieved victory with just 2 moves, and from the looks of it, the other party had not even gone all out. It seemed like there was more to Wu Chen than he had thought. Flaws. Zhong Xian willed. Previously, he had attempted to use the Library of Heaven's Path to check Luo Ruoxin, only to end up fainting. After that incident, he did not dare peek at her anymore. However, surely peeking at the information of the adolescent boy who followed her around should be fine. Once he knew the identity of the adolescent boy, it would not be too difficult for him to figure out Luo Ruoxin's identity. Who? The Library of Heaven's Path jolted, but no book was compiled. What's going on? Zhong Xian was astonished. After battling with the Golden Warrior, Wu Chen was still driving the zhunqi in his body, and such an action could be considered as executing a battle technique. Under normal circumstances, the Library of Heaven's Path should have compiled a book on him, revealing his history and flaws. Why was nothing happening at all? This should not be. Does this mean to say that the adolescent boy possesses the discarnate constitution of divination as well? Zhong Xian frowned. There should only be one possibility if the Library of Heaven's Path was unable to look into a person, and that was if the other party was an existence unseen by the heavens, a host of the discarnate constitution of divination, just like himself. There were many experts and geniuses on the master-teacher continent, but to this very day, there were only 3 people known to possess such a constitution. The first one was him, the second one was Luo Chichi, and while the last one still remained a mystery, the chances were that the mysterious lady that Elder Feng had mentioned back then was Luo Ruoxin. The fact that seers were unable to peer into this girlfriend of his and the Library of Heaven's Path was unable to read her proved this fact. It was one thing for Luo Ruoxin to have the discarnate constitution of divination, but to think that it would be the same for the adolescent boy. This was too fearsome. When did such a constitution become so cheap and commonplace? It's really about time for me to raise the level of the Library of Heaven's Path. Maybe I should find some time to pay a visit to the Shrine of Seers. Zhong Xian stroked his lower jaw and pondered. He had been raising his cultivation, but he had not really upgraded his Library of Heaven's Path over time. While the Library of Heaven's Path was still plenty formidable without being upgraded, it was a little unnerving that there were some things that he could not see through. Perhaps this problem could be resolved after it was upgraded. To date, he still had not fully figured out how upgrading the Library of Heaven's Path worked. The first time that it happened, he had been with Luo Ruoxin and passed out for 3 days straight. The second time, it had been right after he punished the Shrine of Seers. He could not hope to emulate what had happened with Luo Ruoxin that day since he had no idea how that had happened either, but as for punishing the Shrine of Seers, that was a walk in the park. He could easily find the major shrines of seers over the continent and pay them a visit. Of course, that was something to be thought about afterward. For the time being, he had to resolve the current situation first. Raising his head, he saw Luo Ruoxin staring at him with a complicated look in her eyes. Words seemed to be at the tip of her tongue, but she chose not to speak in the end. Turning around, she looked at the 2 remaining golden warriors and said, "I'll deal with the second one." Chapter 1594 Challenging 2 words, "Let me do it instead." Zhong Xian replied awkwardly. He had been so focused on observing Wu Chen that he had forgotten about this matter. How could he allow his girlfriend to fight while he watched on from the side? He was not intending to return to singlehood just yet. "It doesn't matter who goes first," the adolescent boy sculptor replied nonchalantly as he waved his hand. The Z-word morphed into a golden warrior too and stepped forward. "It does matter. You have 3 words over there to deal with the 3 of us, but if I am able to defeat the rest of your golden warriors single-handedly, does that mean that she won't have to make a move?" Zhong Xian asked calmly. "You wish to face 2 words single-handedly?" The adolescent boy sculptor was stunned. "Are you certain?" "Of course," Zhong Xian replied with an affirmative nod. He had been paying close attention to the battle between Wu Chen and the first golden warrior, and the latter's prowess was only so, far from reaching a level that would worry him. It would not be too difficult for him to achieve victory. Since that was the case, there was no need to trouble Luo Ruoxin. Hearing Zhong Xian's words, Luo Ruoxin frowned. "Zhong Xian, the golden warriors of the mentor's calligraphy grow stronger with each passing word. It's fine. It's just 2 words. I'll be able to deal with them," Zhong Xian replied. "Very well then. Be careful." Seeing how confident Zhong Xian was, Luo Ruoxin sighed deeply and nodded. Let's begin. Zhongxian chuckled as he walked up to the two golden warriors. He raised his palm, and a formidable aura surged into the clouds, creating an imposing sight. I guess he does have some valiance to him after all. Wu Chen thought. All along, he could not figure out why someone as formidable as Luo Ruoxin would actually fancy this ordinary young man. However, watching as the young man bucked up his courage and challenged two words simultaneously for the woman that he loved, he felt like he could understand Luo Ruoxin's feelings a little. Despite the young man's boastfulness and showy character, it seemed like he was still rather reliable at crucial moment. Hula. At the same time, the two golden warriors also swiftly raised their cultivation up to the level of Saint Ninden Pinnacle, and without any hesitation, they charged forward and flanked Zhongxian from both sides. The moves that they executed differed from one another, but the timing and coordination of their moves were impeccable, almost as if they were a single entity. Their attacks were sharply directed to strike at Zhongxian's flaws and blind spots, making it difficult for him to dodge. Not bad. Through their outstanding coordination, the prowess that they exerted was many times more fearsome than that of the Ranward character. Despite that, Zhongxian did not show the slightest hint of panic. With a faint smile, he tapped his finger forward. Seal. Hula. The light breeze that had been blowing their way abruptly vanished without a trace. The surrounding space had been entirely sealed. As if fish frozen in ice, the two golden warriors found themselves unable to advance even a single step further. If there had been anything falling at that moment, it would have frozen in midair as well. After comprehending the spatial quintessence of sealing, while Zhongxian might still have difficulties sealing the movements of great sage realm experts, he definitely did not have a problem with subduing those in the same cultivation realm as him. To be able to pull off such strength within 10 minutes after comprehending a spatial quintessence, surpassing even those experts who had devoted their lives to studying the art, just what was going on? It seemed like Wu Chen's doubts were shared by the adolescent boy sculptor as well. With a deep frown on his forehead, he asked in incomprehension, Qiu Wuzi's spatial quintessence is formidable, but not even the person in question would be able to pull off spatial interference as smoothly as you did. Ancient sage Qiu Wu was reputed to be one of the few grandmasters of spatial arts, but even he had not reached this level of expertise. Oh. I found some flaws in ancient sage Qiu Wu's spatial heritage, so I altered it a little. Zhongxian replied leisurely. The heavenly art of dimension unravel could probably be considered the pinnacle of the master-teacher continent spatial arts, but when reflected under the library of Heaven's Path, there was still a hulking number of flaws with it. What Zhongxian had cultivated was the perfected manual, a Heaven's Path technique, so it went without saying that the prowess would be on a completely different level. Ancient sage Qiu Wu's version might still have required the cultivator to gather energy, thus resulting in some time delay, but the one that Zhongxian had perfected through the library of Heaven's Path had no such need. Altered. Before the adolescent boy sculptor could say a word, Wu Chen had already shrieked in disbelief as he nearly keeled over. He had witnessed the young man comprehending the spatial quintessence through browsing his books, and he had thought that it was already a formidable feat that the young man was able to grasp the spatial laws within it so quickly. Yet, who could have thought that within this short period of time, the young man had leisurely been picking bones with the current system of spatial arts and correcting its flaws. And more importantly, his corrections were all spot on, thus bringing the prowess of the spatial art to a whole new level. How in the world could the heavens give birth to such a monster? This was unfair and inhumane. Or, could that elementary spatial art manual really be that formidable, granting someone the ability to alter even ancient sage Qiu Wu's ultimate technique right after browsing through it? If that was the case, he would really have to study it carefully once he got back so that he would one day possess the same mastery over spatial arts as Zhongxian. You corrected it. The adolescent boy sculptor also found it hard to believe Zhongxian's words, but he decided to attribute Zhongxian's success to the support of his seniors and chose not to ask any more about it. Thus, he got back to the topic at hand and said, since you have attained Qiu Wuzi's heritage and cleared the test, you are more than qualified to enter the Ranzi Hall. Please. As adolescent boy sculptor spoke, he bowed deeply before walking toward the Ranzi Hall to lead the way in. Jiyaya. The tightly shut doors to the Ranzi Hall slowly creaked open, and the scent of ancient history burst forth from within. For those who are curious, Z is an honorary suffix used to address distinguished or virtuous men. Chiu Wu, Z, and Ran, Z, are such examples. The same applies for Kong Shi as well, who is commonly addressed as Kong, Z. Chapter 1595 The Stone Doors. Let's go. Seeing that the sculpture had entered, Zhongxian and the others quickly made their way into the Ranzi Hall as well. The passageway had many brilliant night illumination pearls embedded in the ceiling, lighting up the entire place. As such, despite the closed space that they were in, the surroundings were as bright as day. There were ancient inscriptions carved along the passageway that detailed desirable values that a person should cultivate and the etiquette one should preferably adhere to. Didn't you say that ancient sage Ran Qiu is not one to care too much about formalities? Why would? Zhongxian could not help but ask the adolescent boy sculpture. Earlier, the adolescent boy sculpture had said that ancient sage Ran Qiu was a person who paid little attention to formalities, so it seemed highly contradictory to see inscriptions of values and etiquette in the passageway of the Ranzi Hall. It's precisely because he paid little attention to it that he was criticized by Kongsha over it. Thus, he carved these inscriptions to remind himself to adhere by these values and etiquette at all time, the adolescent boy sculpture replied. Kongsha had once said that one should seek to reflect and learn from one's actions, and as one of Kongsha's direct disciples, ancient sage Ran Qiu was bound to adhere by his teachings. Zhongxian hesitated for a moment before asking with a hushed voice, "Did the 4 people who came prior to us cleared the trial as well?" So far, they had not seen any traces of the 4 otherworldly demons who had come ahead of him. Could they possibly have failed the test? Of course, it was not to say that the 4 otherworldly demons who had come before them were weak, but surely the ancient domain left behind by the number 1 student of Kongsha should at least have the capability to discern between otherworldly demons and humans. Otherwise, what a huge disgrace it would be. They have cleared the trial and entered the compounds, the adolescent boy sculpture replied politely. After learning that Zhongxian had inherited ancient sage Qiu Wu's heritage, the attitude of the adolescent boy had become much more courteous. They cleared the trial, too? Then, did you notice any anomaly with them? Zhongxian frowned. Anomaly? The adolescent boy sculpture shook his head in response. There's nothing of that sort. They have defeated the golden warriors of Mentor's calligraphy and cleared the trial fair and square. However, one of them did have one of ancient sage Yang Yang's treasures with him. Ancient sage Yang Yang's treasure? Zhongxian widened his eyes in astonishment. Ancient sage Yang Yang was one of the 10 apostles under Kongsha's lineage, too. Viewed to be of equal standing with ancient sage Bo Shong, ancient sage Ran Qiu, and the others, he had specialized in the field of music. He had played a huge part in passing down the heritage of the demonic tunist guild, and for that reason, most demonic tunists viewed him as their founder. But to think that those 4 otherworldly demons would actually have one of his possessions. To be able to arrive on the Master Teacher continent while avoiding the detection of the Master Teachers, find ancient domains that even the Master Teacher Pavilion is unaware of, and even be in possession of one of ancient sage Yang Yang's treasures, it seems like the otherworldly demonic tribe has really prepared. Zhongxian thought grimly. The war between the otherworldly demonic tribe and mankind had caused immense damage to both parties over the years. Mankind had lost a lot of its treasures to the otherworldly demonic tribe, so it was not unthinkable for them to be in possession of one of ancient sage Yang Yang's treasures. However, Zhongxian was a little surprised by how well prepared they were. It was definitely no easy feat for one to fool the eyes of the adolescent boy sculpture. The reason Zhongxian had asked that question was to warn the adolescent boy sculpture. If those 4 fellows had shown the slightest lapse in their disguise, the adolescent boy sculpture would surely have raised his guard against them. However, from the looks of it, there was no point bringing up the matter anymore since he had no evidence against those 4 fellows. It would be one thing if he failed to convince the adolescent boy sculpture of the matter, but it would be a catastrophe if he accidentally turned the adolescent boy sculpture against him in the midst of doing so. Without a doubt, they must have prepared for this matter for a very long time. It was no wonder they had been able to capture Zhao Ya and the others so easily. Indeed, it would not be easy to deal with those 4 after all. We have arrived. In the midst of his thoughts, Zhongxian suddenly heard a voice from the side. Raising his head, he found that they had already arrived in an atrium. The atrium was round in shape, and there were doors all around. With just a quick glance, he could already spot nearly 100 of them. There are 99 doors here, and each of them represents a different trial. Each of you can only enter one of the doors, and no two persons can select the same door to enter. If you successfully clear the trial and reach the very end, you will be able to find what you seek. The adolescent boy sculpture turned around and addressed them. If you fail to clear the trial, you will have to spend the rest of your life here with me till your time is finally up. Zhongxian looked at the doors around him as he confirmed once more. So, we can choose any door that we like here? That's right, feel free to enter any door you want. You only have an incense's time, so make your decision quick. After saying those words, the adolescent boy sculpture took 2 steps back and stood quietly. Knowing that it would be futile to ask the adolescent boy sculpture for any hints, Zhongxian, Luo Ruoxin, and Wu Chen exchanged glances as they began examining each of the doors carefully. All of the doors were made of granite and were identical in appearance. There was nothing that allowed them to set any of the doors apart from one another. If not for the doorway that they had entered the atrium from, had they closed their eyes and spun around, it would have been impossible to tell which doors they had set their eyes upon previously. This is no different from a labyrinth. Looking at the doors around left Zhongxian feeling a little lightheaded. Unable to make sense of the situation, he willed in his heart, Eye of Insight. Hula. Lines of insight surfaced in Zhongxian's eyes, and he quickly scanned his surroundings carefully. Since the 4 otherworldly demons had entered the palace before them, they would have come to this atrium and made a decision as well. The fact that they had come well prepared for this ancient domain, bringing with them the Netherworld's boat and even a treasure of ancient sage Yang Yang, would suggest that they had prior knowledge of this place. So, it should be much safer to follow their footsteps. With a swift scan of the surroundings, a deep frown formed in between Zhongxian's brows. Why aren't there any marks around? He had thought that he would be able to find some clues, just as he had done outside. However, who could have thought that those 4 fellows did not leave any clues behind, such that even the Eye of Insight was unable to catch the slightest trace of them? Seeing through Zhongxian's thoughts, Luo Ruoxin sent a telepathic message over. Don't bother. Since this is a trial, there's no way it would allow you to see through anything. Furthermore, the stone sculpture has also said that no 2 people can enter the same door, which means that even if you find the doors that they've entered, we won't be able to enter them. Zhongxian was rendered speechless. Indeed. Since this was a test, there was no way that ancient sage Ran Qiu would have left such an obvious loophole. After all, after someone had entered one of the doors and triggered all of its traps and formations, there would no longer be any danger in it. What do we do now? Zhongxian asked. Let's leave it to fate and pick a random one, Luo Ruoxin said as she randomly picked a door and pulled it open without any hesitation. You. Be careful. Seeing that Luo Ruoxin was going to enter the door just like that, Zhongxian could not help but feel a little apprehensive on the inside. Rest assured. Luo Ruoxin replied with a faint but confident smile. Ancient sage Ran Qiu's trial is unlikely to be easy, but to keep me here is not an easy feat either. After saying those words, she decisively entered the door. That's true. Zhongxian had never seen Luo Ruoxin making a move before, but considering how powerful Wu Chen was, it stood to reason that Luo Ruoxin was a formidable expert as well. The trial left behind by ancient sage Ran Qiu might still pose a great challenge to ordinary geniuses, but to her, it was unlikely to pose any threat at all. I'll be entering as well. Seeing that Luo Ruoxin had already entered one of the doors, Wu Chen also randomly picked a room and strode in. You're the only one who is left. The adolescent boy sculpture remarked calmly by the side. Zhongxian nodded. He was just about to select a random room too when his heart suddenly skipped a beat. The Eye of Insight might be unable to see through what lies beyond the door, but what about the Library of Heaven's Path? In order to make contextual sense, I had to take the literal meaning of the word, which is music. However, the more accurate interpretation would be the impartation of ritual propriety through music. Basically, you can think of it as spreading culture, values, and thoughts in the form of poems, folk songs, and so on. This happens to be what Yang Yang, a real historical figure, is credited for as well. Chapter 1596. My hands itch to draw. With different encounters behind each of the 99 doors, the danger levels were bound to be different too. Without a doubt, there would be a huge difference between selecting a right door and selecting a wrong door. Otherwise, the adolescent boy sculpture would not have given them a whole incense's time to make their choice. Considering that this was a trial left behind by an ancient sage, due to the limitation of his cultivation, it was understandable why the Eye of Insight did not work. However, what about the Library of Heaven's Path? It boasted the ability to see through everything beneath the heavens. Since that was the case, what better tool could there be than to have it make a choice in his stead? It should be easy for it to discern which ones were the right ones and which ones were the wrong ones. Having made up his mind, Zhongxian immediately got to action. He flicked his wrist, took out a white sheet of paper and a brush, and began drawing. As an 8-star painter, the speed and quality of his drawing had already reached a superb level. In less than 3 minutes, he had already replicated a lifelike view of the entire atrium. After that was done, he swiftly wrote the words correct on each and every door. Given how many doors there were here, there was bound to be one that was more correct than the others. The Library of Heaven's Path was able to analyze the flaws and mistakes of objects, so by looking at the flaws, he would be able to determine which door he ought to enter. While Zhongxian was busy doing all of this, the adolescent boy sculptor looked on with a completely bewildered expression. He had thought that the young man would simply select a door and enter, but who could have thought that he would suddenly take out a brush and paper and begin drawing and writing? All you have to do is choose one of the doors. Surely you don't have to go through so much trouble just to choose one, right? Do you have difficulties making choices or something? Time's almost up. If you don't enter soon, your qualification to challenge the trial will be revoked, the adolescent boy sculptor warned. Noted. I'll make my choice soon. Zhongxian replied as he finished scribbling correct on the final door. Once that was done, he placed his finger on the painting. Who? An identical painting appeared in his mind. Soon, upon finding the correct door to enter, he heaved a sigh of relief. Opening his eyes, Zhongxian said with a smile, "All right, I have made my choice." Seeing the confused look on the adolescent boy sculptor's face, he explained with a light chuckle, "Actually, I'm also an avid painter. Whenever I see interesting scenes, I have an urge to draw them. This bad habit of mine kicked up earlier when I saw this splendid atrium, so I ask for your understanding." Interesting scenes? Splendid atrium? The adolescent boy sculptor was rendered speechless. All that's in this atrium are granite doors. If even such a sight is interesting to you, your right hand must be really busy. Well, I don't blame you for not understanding. You are just a stone sculpture, so it's understandable that you don't share the aesthetics of us humans. Zhongxian laughed heartily a little as he patted the shoulder of the adolescent boy sculptor sympathetically before heading toward one of the doors. You. Realizing that he had just been mocked, the adolescent boy sculptor bared his teeth furiously. Ancient sage Qiu Wu had been an upright and austere person, so how in the world did he end up taking in such an infuriating little brat as his student? A person as troublesome as you is doomed to be single for life. To think that you can be so indecisive about choosing a door. Heh. Wait a moment. Looking at the direction that the young man was heading in, the adolescent boy sculptor suddenly widened his eyes in astonishment. Gia. He stared with his mouth agape as the young man opened the door and disappeared into it. He actually chose that door? But that is. How did he know? The adolescent boy sculptor blinked in disbelief. Of the 99 doors, the chances of that young man choosing that door randomly was simply too slim, so he did not think that the young man would be able to select that one. Who would have thought that he would be so lucky as to choose that door out of so many choices? It was almost as if Lady Luck was shining on him. Soon, the adolescent boy sculptor recovered from his shock and harumphed coldly. Even if his luck is good, he'll need some strength to match his luck. That fellow in the door is far more violent and merciless than I am. Even if he has chosen the correct door, he could very well lose his life in there. Jia. As the granite door closed, Zhongxian found himself standing within a passageway. He took a few more steps forward, intending to scan his surroundings so as to see what was around, but before he could do anything, an overwhelming pressure suddenly pressed down on him, causing his body to stagger a little. This pressure seemed to seep right into his soul, carrying a force that threatened to crush him into bits the moment that he let his guard down. It's a soul attack. Zhongxian's face darkened. He had undergone plenty of soul attacks in the past, but this was the first time that he had encountered one as forceful as this. It seemed to pierce right through his physical body, leaving him feeling as if he was standing in the midst of a turbulent ocean, powerless against the overwhelming force before him. Heaven's Path Soul Art. Knowing that it would be bad if he allowed such an attack to continue getting to him, Zhongxian took a deep breath and began driving his soul energy furiously to fend off the attack. Chapter 1597 The Power of the Zhong Clan Bloodline. Zhongxian hurriedly grabbed the compiled book and flipped it open. The content swiftly flowed into his head and imprinted into his mind. It has indeed reached the level of Heaven's Path. Ha 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 ha. Zhongxian nearly leaped up from joy. He had wanted to practice soul traverse for a very long time now, and he had been searching for books relating to souls in order to perfect the technique. However, who would have thought that what he was lacking was not soul-related manuals but space-related manuals? I'll temper my soul first before cultivating soul traverse, Zhongxian decided. Thus, he crossed his leg and sat down. With a thought, he drew his soul out from his glabella. TZZZZZZZZZZ. Without the protection of the physical body, the pressure that pressed down on Zhongxian's soul immediately intensified. In an instant, he felt as if he was standing amid a raging hurricane that was trying to tear him apart. Heavy like a boulder, firm like a mountain, knowing that if he would lose his life if he could not withstand this ordeal, Zhongxian focused on the imagery of a massive mountain, the White Creek Mountain. There was a type of soul training that was known as conceptualization training. Through focusing one's thoughts on a single conceptualization, it would help to refine one's soul energy in the form of the conceptualization. For example, if one thought of flames, one's soul energy could become scorching like the raging inferno, and if one thought of ice, one's soul energy would become chilling like the heartless winter. Zhongxian had done conceptualization training back when he had just started cultivating, but with the Heaven's Path Soul Art to raise his soul cultivation, he had found that there was not much need for him to do it, so he had not paid much attention to it. However, in this very moment, he knew that he had to do it or risk having his soul torn into shreds. 1. Focusing on the conceptualization of a mountain, Zhongxian's wavering soul swiftly stabilized in place. As if an imposing mountain towering in the midst of a storm, no matter how the gale huffed and puffed, it remained completely unfazed, unable to be blown down. After stabilizing his figure, Zhongxian took a deep breath and drew the crushing pressure into his soul, tempering the weaker parts of his soul. Jeji. Under the tempering of the crushing pressure, his massive soul grew more and more concentrated and powerful. The pressure isn't as unbearable anymore. Advance. A few minutes later, when Zhongxian had finally adapted to the pressure, he took a few steps forward before sitting down to continue the tempering process. In the atrium, the motionless adolescent boy sculpture opened his eyes once more. Let's see how that fellow is faring. Even if that fellow inside doesn't make a move, just the pressure that it exerts should be able to stop that young man in his tracks or even crush his soul entirely. Muttering beneath his breath, the adolescent boy sculpture raised his finger and tapped the space before him. A screen of light appeared in the air, and a display of Zhongxian's plight within the door came into appearance. The young man should have. What's going on? The adolescent boy sculpture was still uttering smug words when he noticed that something was amiss with the displayed scene before him. His eyes swiftly widened to the brim, seemingly ready to pop out from their sockets. In the screen of light, the young man had his hands on his hips, and he howled indignantly with an infuriated look on his face. Where the hell is the pressure? You coward, I dare you to come out and face me straight on. I haven't absorbed enough of it yet. If that's all you've got, how dare you call yourself a trial? If you don't come out now, Don't blame me if I tear this entire place down. He's actually provoking the it. The adolescent boy sculpture nearly blacked out. He had thought that with that person making a move, just the aura that the fellow emanated would be enough to crush the young man. Who would have thought that not only would the young man be perfectly fine, he was even mocking it for being too weak. Just where did this monster come from? This was too ridiculous. Forget it. Since there isn't any pressure anymore, I'll just head in. After hurling provocations one after another without the pressure returning, Zhongxian could only shake his head in resignation. To be honest, it was not that he wanted to brag, but the pressure had simply disappeared too abruptly. He had just barely gotten into the mood of training, and the results had just started showing on his soul when the pressure suddenly vanished without a trace. Anyone would have been infuriated in such a situation. After all, if he could just cultivate a little more, there was a good chance that he would reach the prerequisites to carrying out soul traverse, thus raising his fighting prowess by a notch. Let's see where the source of the pressure comes from first. I might just be able to do something about it. Zhongxian thought as he advanced forward. Hula. Barely after taking a few steps, as he was turning a corner, he suddenly felt a chilling sensation consuming his body. Following which, he sensed a powerful might rushing in his direction. He quickly pressed himself tightly against the wall by the side. Pu. A small hole appeared in the wall of the passageway. What the? Zhongxian's eyebrows shot up in alarm. What had just shot over was not a hidden weapon, sword chi, or anything of the sort. It was an ordinary droplet of water. Just a droplet of water had succeeded in breaching his defenses and piercing the wall of the passageway. Without a doubt, the person who had made a move on him had to be at the Great Sage Realm at the very minimum. I'll wait and see who the person is before deciding whether I should use Kong Shi's blood droplet or not. Placing his finger right above the droplet mark in his hand, ready to come into contact with it and activate the power at any moment, Zhongxian hesitated for a moment before taking another step forward warily. He only had 2 more uses of Kong Shi's blood droplets, so he could not afford to waste it. Voila! Barely after walking around the bend, he saw dozens of water droplets of varying sizes flying over rapidly, sealing all his paths of escape. These water droplets were not really infused with tremendously powerful zhenqi, but the speed of their movements was simply frightening. Given his current cultivation, if they got a clean strike on him, he would definitely sustain severe wounds or even lose his life. Bloodline activate. Knowing that there was no time for him to escape, Zhongxian immediately activated the Zhong clan bloodline, which sword Saint Xing had given him previously. Who? In an instant, time seemed to have slowed down. The water droplets that had been surging in his direction furiously a moment ago seemed to have become mired in a swamp, such that he could perceive them clearly even with his plain eyes. He raised his finger and tapped the closest water droplet to him lightly. Po! The water droplet immediately scattered apart, moistening his finger. He moved on to tap the remaining dozens of water droplets, and they scattered into the surroundings, too. Knowing that he was finally out of danger, Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief as he nodded in awe. As expected of the Zhong clan bloodline, its prowess was even more fearsome than the Luo clan bloodline, displaying astounding might upon activation. If he had not utilized this ability, there was no doubt that he would have sustained severe injuries from the barrage of water droplets. However, through the acceleration of his time, the water droplets were slowed to the speed of a snail's crawl, thus posing no threat toward him anymore. Unfortunately, the rate of depletion of the blood essence is simply too great. As excited as Zhong Xian was, he could not help but shake his head helplessly after seeing the amount of power that he had left from the droplet of Zhong clan blood essence. Just to pop a couple of water droplets, he had actually expended more than half of a droplet of Zhong clan blood essence. In other words, he could only repeat what he had done 6 more times before completely depleting the Zhong clan blood essence that he had. This was simply too wasteful. Who? With another thought, he returned from his state of time acceleration, and the scenery before him reverted to its original state. It was then that he realized that he was standing in the midst of a vast hall. At the very center of the hall was a lake of a radius of several hundred meters. The water in the lake were bubbling furiously, as if it was being boiled. Just as Zhong Xian was perplexed as to how the lake could conjure such swift bullets of water, he heard an intense rumbling from beneath the water. Following which, a bizarre entity spurted forth from the lake of water, surging upward. Voila! More water droplets whizzed into the surroundings. This passageway contains the greatest treasure of the 99 doors, but it's also the most dangerous of them. The one who wins my acknowledgement will be able to take me away, and those who fail my trial shall have their lives reaped by me, the skeletal dragon said impassively. You said that, the one who wins your acknowledgement will be able to take you away. Zhong Xian's eyes lit up in excitement at that notion. Even the droplets casually flung out the skeletal dragon wielded the strength to slaughter Saint Nine Dan pinnacle cultivators with ease. That prowess was definitely nowhere beneath Yang Shi's. If he could take this skeletal dragon away with him, his overall prowess would surely rise by leaps and bounds. Indeed. However, if you wish to earn my acknowledgement, you'll have to first display prowess surpassing mine. Back then, ancient sage Ran Qiu also used his strength to convince me to serve him for life. I have already slept here for tens of thousands of years, awaiting another worthy individual to serve. The skeletal dragon replied. Ancient sage Ran Qiu. You are ancient sage Ran Qiu's weapon? Could you be the dragonbone divine spear? Zhong Xian suddenly thought of something, and his body shuddered in astonishment. He had read some books concerning ancient sage Ran Qiu, so he knew bits and pieces of his history. The dragonbone divine spear was the weapon that ancient sage Ran Qiu had wielded as he slew hordes of otherworldly demons as if a mortal manifestation of the god of war. Even Kong Shi had once praised the formidability of the dragonbone divine spear. Could this skeletal dragon really be that legendary weapon? If that was the case, he really had made the right choice choosing this passageway. Indeed. The skeletal dragon replied nonchalantly. Ancient sage Ran Qiu has sealed my powers, such that my fighting prowess is only at the level of great sage at the moment. Nevertheless, as long as you are able to defeat me, I'll willingly leave with you. Otherwise, no matter who you are and what background you come from, I'll pierce a gaping hole through you for your arrogance of daring to challenge me. Of course. It's only right that you should do so, just that. Zhong Xian raised his head to look at the skeletal dragon earnestly. As you can see, I'm only a Saint Nine Dan pinnacle cultivator myself. Even if you can only tap into the strength of a great sage at the moment, I'm still no match for you. Won't you consider suppressing your cultivation to my level before fighting it out? You want me to suppress my cultivation to match your level? The skeletal dragon asked with a hint of displeasure in its voice. Having been sealed here for a long time, I believe that you are craving to dive into the world and clash with some worthy opponents. Right now, I'm the only one who has chosen this passageway, and if no one else comes by after me, doesn't that mean that you'll never be able to get out? That would be the greatest tragedy for a top-notch weapon like you, wouldn't it? Zhongxian exclaimed passionately. Since it's a duel, it will only be meaningful if the both of us are on equal standing, right? Otherwise, what fun will it be if you win in a single move? The skeletal dragon hesitated upon hearing those words. It's settled then. You are the trump card of ancient sage Ranqiu, so your fighting prowess is bound to be at the very top. There's no way a weak cultivator like me will be able to pose a threat to you even if you do suppress your cultivation down to my level. Zhongxian remarked admiringly. But if you aren't feeling too confident, I guess it can't be helped then. Humph. There's no way I would lose to you with my cultivation suppress. Provoked by Zhongxian's words, the skeletal dragon harumphed coldly. Fine, I'll suppress my cultivation down to Saint 9 Dan Pinnacle. In truth, the skeletal dragon knew that Zhongxian was intentionally provoking it, but its pride still got in its way. More importantly, it did not think that it could possibly lose to Zhongxian. Boom. The next moment, the Dragonbone Divine Spear's powerful aura gradually reduced to a level equivalent to Zhongxian's, Saint 9 Dan Pinnacle. Humph, let's begin then. After sealing its cultivation, the skeletal dragon was just about to make its move when the vision before it abruptly blurred. Unknowingly, the young man who had been standing right there a moment ago was already standing before it, sending a punch right toward its dragon head. You! Caught off guard by the other party's swift movement and abrupt assault, the skeletal dragon felt a little stifled inside. It swiftly whipped its tail to strike down the young man, but the next instant, it found that the space around it had been completely sealed. As if a frozen river, it was unable to move at all. Ancient sage Qiu Wu's spatial sealing art, the skeletal dragon exclaimed in shock. The next instant, a splitting pain ripped through its skull. The young man's fist had already landed squarely on its head. Peng 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 peng. Punches and kicks rained down on the skeletal dragon, sending stabbing pain reverberating through its body. It was almost like being battered by the ceaseless rapids of a river, completely messing up its momentum, not giving it the opportunity to recover at all. Under the relentless attack, not only were the skeletal dragon's bones slowly accumulating damage, its soul was also severely jolted. The skeletal dragon was frenzied. How is he so powerful? Chapter 1599. Acknowledge your new master. Even though the skeletal dragon had lowered its cultivation, there was no doubt that it was the absolute pinnacle among Saint 9 Dan Pinnacle entities. Putting aside the fact that its body had already been tempered to a level exceeding great sage realm cultivators, just its battle instincts alone had been refined over the many years of battle with ancient sage Ranqiu. It had encountered all kinds of cultivators and many different ultimate techniques, but this, what the heck was this? Seemingly devoid of skills, the young man simply rushed in to rain down a barrage of attacks on it as if some street hoodlum. And what was even more stifling was that it was actually unable to dodge at all. This had to be the greatest humiliation that it had ever faced since its birth. Roar. As the fists and kicks continued raining down on its head, the skeletal dragon finally reached the limits of its patience. With a furious roar, it compressed its body tightly together. Hula. The entire body of massive bones swiftly converged together to form a black spear. Break. With a powerful pierce, as if a block of ice struck by a hammer, the sealed space shattered instantaneously with a resounding reverberation. Deng 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 deng. Due to the feedback, Zhongxian was forced to retreat several steps as his chest ached a little under the impact of the previous encounter. The ability to seal space was indeed powerful, but in the face of a true expert, its effectiveness was discounted. While the force that the Dragonbone Divine Spear exerted was still within the range of Saint 9 Dan Pinnacle, it was able to gather all of its might in a single point to conduct a burst attack that exceeded the limits of the sealed space. Of course, this also had something to do with the fact that he had just comprehended the spatial quintessence of sealing. If he spent more time comprehending it so as to advance his level of mastery of spatial arts, he would be able to use it more smoothly, and it would not have been so easy for the Dragonbone Divine Spear to break it. How dare you humiliate me? I'll make you pay the price for your actions. After breaking the sealed space and achieving freedom once more, the skeletal dragon howled furiously. From its spear form, it reverted back to the appearance of a skeletal dragon as it dashed forth with its mouth wide open. Sue. Barely after arriving before the young man, another blur flashed across its eyes, and the young man vanished from sight. It hurriedly searched the surroundings for the young man, only to see a leg flying toward its face. Peng 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 peng. 4 consecutive kicks threw the skeletal dragon into a state of disorientation, and its skull was nearly lopped off its neck. Screw you. The skeletal dragon bellowed hysterically. Since it's a duel, surely we can have a fair fight, right? Why do you have to keep aiming for my face? Are you sure that you are a master teacher? Don't you know that the face is out of bounds? Voila. Seething with fury, the skeletal dragon whipped its thick tail toward the young man in the air, wanting to crush him to bits. However, barely after raising its tail, it suddenly felt a tension stopping the movement of its tail. Unknowingly, the young man was already beneath him, grabbing its tailbone. Bam 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 bam. With overwhelming might, the young man slammed it from left to right as if a whip, causing its head to crash relentlessly with the ground, creating huge pits here and there. The skeletal dragon is being pummeled. The adolescent boy sculptor watching the happenings through a screen of light shuddered in horror at that sight. It was simply too shocking that his head even fell to the ground and rolled to the side. He swiftly picked it up and secured it on his neck before turning his gaze back to the screen. The more he watched it, the more horrified he seemed to become. Even though the skeletal dragon had suppressed its cultivation down to Saint 9 Dan, it should still have been the absolute pinnacle existence among Saint 9 Dan entities. Yet, the young man was actually able to render it completely helpless, almost as if an adult toying with a child. Do you really have to be this savage? If not for the skeletal dragon tempering its bones to the level of near invulnerability, this vicious pummeling would have already reduced it to powdery remains. The adolescent boy sculptor had considered most possibilities, including one where the young man was completely destroyed by the skeletal dragon, but not even in his wildest imagination did he fathom such an outcome. How could he have? That was the personal weapon of ancient sage Ran Chio, the Dragonbone Divine Spear. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! I'll kill you. Slammed to the point where its head was spinning endlessly, the skeletal dragon could not stand it any longer and released the seal on its cultivation. Its powers immediately pierced the heavens, and in the blink of an eye, its cultivation had risen from Saint 9 Dan to Great Sage 1 Dan Introspective Convalescence Rel. With the huge boost in its prowess, the skeletal dragon successfully struggled free from Zhongxian's grip, and it twisted its body forcefully and tore its claw down upon Zhongxian, who. But with a burst of wind, the young man vanished from the skeletal dragon's vision once more. The next instant, he appeared right above the skeletal dragon's head as he sent a powerful kick toward its temple. The skeletal dragon's frenzy had already transcended words. It was one thing for it not to be a match for the young man in the same realm, but it had already raised its cultivation by 1 realm, and the young man was still able to dodge its attack with ease. Just how powerful was the young man? Not even the powerful ancient sage Ran Chio possessed such fighting prowess. In a battle in the same cultivation realm, it was likely that even ancient sage Ran Chio would not be a match for the young man. The skeletal dragon hurriedly cowered back to dodge the attack. While its agility and reaction speed had been enhanced significantly after raising its cultivation up to the introspective convalescence realm, it was still nowhere near enough to compete with the young man's speed. If the young man executed that time bloodline ability once more, it could still have accepted its loss. After all, there were no moves that could possibly outdo time. But the young man was only relying on some unique movement arts and his understanding of spatial laws to render him powerless. Honestly, the skeletal dragon was still trying to figure out how this had happened. It was as if the other party knew where it would attack in advance, easily finding the blind spots and flaws in its attack. The more the skeletal dragon fought, the more stifled it felt. Peng 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 peng. After suffering yet another 4-kick chain combo, its rage finally exploded, and its cultivation surged forth once more. Despite wielding such strength, the young man had actually duped it into lowering its cultivation. Without a doubt, it was a vicious scheme, and against schemers, there was no need for it to uphold its principles. Thus, it decided not to suppress its cultivation anymore, and in the blink of an eye, its cultivation broke through the bottleneck of introspective convalescence. Aureate body, intuitive impulse, sempiternal. In less than a single breath, it had returned to the overwhelming expert from before. Lad, didn't you have a lot of fun pummeling me? Very well, let me see how you'll cope with this, the skeletal dragon roared furiously. But even so, the young man still vanished from its sights once more. Hurriedly raising its head, it saw that the young man was already sitting on a stone bench not too far away from the lake, holding a cup of tea in his hand like a refined gentleman. Hearing the skeletal dragon's roar, Zhongxian put down his teacup calmly and replied, "Don't you think it's really barbarous to be talking about pummeling and killing? Since you are ancient sage Ran Qiu's personal weapon, you should understand the propriety of respect and magnanimity. Since you have already lost, you should obediently acknowledge me as your master." "You want me to acknowledge me as your master? An insolent brat like you actually dares to." If its emotions could be materialized, the skeletal dragon would have burst into flames there and then. "You were the one who was viciously pummeling earlier, but now that I have restored my cultivation, you suddenly said that you don't want to fight anymore. How can there be something so convenient in the world? Dream on. If I don't leave several holes in you and reduce you to a pile of meat, I shan't be known as the Dragonbone Divine Spear anymore. Are you sure you don't want to acknowledge me as your master?" The young man asked calmly. If you want me to acknowledge you as my master, why don't you try defeating me right here, Anne?" The skeletal dragon sneered furiously. But before it could finish its words, a loud rumble echoed in its head. Moo. Mau. Pada. All of a sudden, the skeletal dragon felt its body stiffening in place. It felt as if a superior being was exerting dominance over it, suppressing it very down to the core. Unable to move at all, it plummeted from the sky. "It's out of respect for you that I allowed you to clash with me, but you seem to be climbing over my head." Harumphing coldly, Zhongxian composedly rose to his feet and placed his hands behind his back. "Acknowledge me as your master right now or face the consequences of your insolence." Chapter 1600 Golden Origin Spirit Stone. Regardless of whether the huge fellow carried the dragon bloodline or was a pile of dragon bones, since there was a dragon in its name and it had not reached the level of a pure-blooded dragon, it would be suppressed by the 8 notes of Heavenly Dragon. Even before the battle, Zhongxian had known this, but being the low-profile person that he was, he had intended to use his raw strength to win the Dragonbone Divine Spear over. However, who would have thought that the other party would be so shameless as to raise its strength after seeing that it was on the losing end? "I could still turn a blind eye to you raising your cultivation by a realm, but raising it by several at once, that would really be going too far. Even someone as magnanimous like me can't turn a blind eye of it." Thus, he had mercilessly used the 8 notes of Heavenly Dragon, and of course, as expected, the Dragonbone Divine Spear was immediately suppressed. Lying on the ground, the skeletal dragon asked through chattering molars, "Why you are a pure-blooded dragon?" Suppressed by the power of the 8 notes of Heavenly Dragon, it felt as if its consciousness was on the verge of slipping away from it. It was not the primary consciousness of the Dragonbone but a weapon spirit that had grown after the Dragonbone had been forged into a spear. As such, it had retained the traits of the dragon tribe, and the instinctive deference and fear toward pure-blooded dragons was ground in its bones. Pure-blooded dragons were existences that represented the pinnacle of the dragon tribe's authority, and no lower dragons could ever buck up the courage to oppose them. Must I be a pure-blooded dragon in order to use the 8 notes of Heavenly Dragon? Zhongxian sneered coldly. The skeletal dragon was rendered speechless. Having fought alongside ancient sage Ran Qiu, it had met the strongest being of the master-teacher continent, Kongsha, before, but not even Kongsha had the ability to vocalize the 8 notes of Heavenly Dragon. Yet, the young man before it was actually able to do so. Just who in the world was the young man before it? The skeletal dragon hesitated for a moment before eventually lowering its head. I am willing to acknowledge you as my master. The hierarchy within the dragon tribe was based on their bloodline. It was natural for those of a lesser bloodline to serve those of a higher bloodline. On top of that, it was a fact that the young man had defeated it, so there was no shame in its actions. Good. Zhong Xian nodded. Just as it was about to ask how the acknowledgement ceremony would go, the skeletal dragon suddenly began contracting rapidly, and just like before, it turned into a massive spear. Wang. It circled in the air for a bit as it shrank to the length of roughly a zhong before falling into Zhong Xian's hand. Lowering his head to take a closer look, Zhong Xian assessed his winnings. The spear in his hand was black in color, and a cold glint reflected off its tip. Just the sight of the spear left one with the sensation that the spear would pierce a hole through one the next moment, sending shivers down the spines of the weaker-minded. Excellent spear! Zhong Xian exclaimed in agitation. Just by stroking the spear lightly, he could hear the roar of a dragon echoing around him. When he attempted to infuse his junqi into the spear, he delightedly realized that there were no obstructions at all, as if the spear was just an extension of his meridians. It was actually capable of harnessing his power with full efficiency. Pada. A droplet of his blood fell on the spear tip, and it was swiftly absorbed in. In the blink of an eye, a brilliant surge of light burst forth from the spear, and slight cracks appeared in the space all around. With this powerful weapon, my fighting prowess would be heightened by at least twofold. Zhong Xian trembled in agitation. There was no doubt that this Dragonbone Divine Spear was the most powerful artifact that he had acquired ever since he arrived on the Master Teacher continent. While ancient sage Ran Qiu might have sealed its power, the might that it wielded was still beyond formidable. Of course, due to the limitations of his current cultivation, it was inevitable that he would still be unable to bring out the true prowess of the spear. Nevertheless, once he triggered Kong Shi's blood droplet, with this spear in hand, there would be absolutely no one beneath ancient sage who would be a match for him. In fact, even half-ancient sages would be well within his means to deal with. It's no wonder the Library of Heaven's Path guided me to this passageway. With this alone, the long journey here won't have been in vain. Laughing heartily, Zhong Xian flicked his wrist, and the spear warped back into a skeletal dragon. With a thought, the skeletal dragon turned into a belt that wrapped around his waist. After taming the spear, he found that the skeletal dragon had the ability to freely change its form. As a spear, it could pierce through anything that stood in its way. As a whip, it could leave deep gashes on the world. After that was done, Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief as he scanned his surroundings once more. At this point, the lake had already quietened down, returning back to its initial tranquility. In the empty-looking hall, there were no visible exits. "Have I cleared the trial yet?" Zhong Xian asked the skeletal dragon in confusion. "Of course, you have already cleared the trial. I'd send you out right now, but there are some of my possessions over here that I hope to take away with me," the skeletal dragon said. "I see. All right then," Zhong Xian said. "Go and take them then." The skeletal dragon swiftly flew out from Zhong Xian's waist and rose into the air, reverting back to the massive several dozen-meter-long dragon. It descended to the top of the water and swiped its claws into the lake. Hula! The lake immediately billowed furiously under the overwhelming might, and a circular platform slowly rose into the air. It was roughly 3 meters in diameter, but it emanated a shockingly concentrated spiritual energy that felt nourishing like the warm breeze of spring. This is the ultimate treasure of smithing, the Golden Origin Spirit Stone? Zhong Xian widened his eyes in disbelief. Despite being a failure of a blacksmith who could only forge bricks, his comprehension of smithing and ores was at least up to standard. Or to be more exact, even 9-star blacksmiths might not be able to compete with him in terms of sheer knowledge. Even with a glance from afar, he could tell that the circular platform was the ultimate treasure that the top blacksmiths dreamt of even with their eyes wide open, the Golden Origin Spirit Stone. In the forging of an average Saint high-tier artifact, just adding a single gram of the Golden Origin Spirit Stone into the forging process would be enough to enhance the artifact into a Saint pinnacle artifact, and there was actually a huge circular platform of it right in front of here. Just how many tons would that weigh? Even someone as calm as Zhongxian could not help but feel his face flushing red in agitation. An uncontrollable desire sprouted in the depths of his heart. It could be said that just this circular platform, in terms of value, would not pale in comparison to a pinnacle great sage artifact. Indeed, this is the Golden Origin Spirit Stone. Back then, when ancient sage Ranqiu sealed me here, he instructed me to wait for the next destined person to appear and win my acknowledgement. However, I have waited here for so long that I have already lost track of time. Ultimately, as a weapon spirit, my lifespan is still limited. Knowing this, ancient sage Ranqiu placed this artifact into the lake. As long as I rest above it, my strength wouldn't dissipate, and my lifespan can be significantly lengthened, the skeletal dragon explained. I see. Zhongxian nodded in realization. This was also a question that he had been wondering about. Even if the Dragonbone Divine Spear had been one of the strongest weapons tens of thousands of years ago, after the passing of so many years, its weapon spirit should have already aged to the point where battling would be impossible for it. Fortunately, it seemed like ancient sage Ranqiu had already predicted this problem and made preparations in advance. With the Golden Origin Spirit Stone to sustain the Dragonbone Divine Spear, the vitality of its weapon spirit could be sustained. Even after hibernating for tens of thousands of years, it was still able to exert its greatest fighting prowess without any problem. However, since I have already awakened, this Golden Origin Spirit Stone is of no use to me. Thus, I'm willing to offer it to you, Master. With a wave of its claw, the Golden Origin Spirit Stone flew toward Zhongxian. Zhongxian hurriedly caught it and stowed it into his storage ring. Ha ha ha, I won't turn down your gift then. Seeing the possessions and magnanimity of Sword Saint Xing had made him acutely aware of how shallow his view of valuable was compared to others. While this Golden Origin Spirit Stone might be an invaluable treasure to him, it likely meant nothing to an expert of ancient sage Ranqiu's caliber. Since the skeletal dragon was willing to offer it to him, he had no reason to turn it down. Furthermore, it just so happened that the Golden Origin Spirit Stone was an ideal resource to reforge the Golden Origin Cauldron. With this, he would be able to upgrade the Golden Origin Cauldron once more, and it would be able to aid him in his future battles. Master, we can leave right now. After handing the Golden Origin Spirit Stone over, the skeletal dragon warped back into a belt and wrapped itself around Zhongxian. Raising his head, Zhongxian found that there was an identical stone door to the one that he had entered through not too far away. He quickly walked over to it and pushed it open. Jia. When the stone door opened, he found that he had returned to the atrium, where two groups of people were standing against one another. Their zhenqi crackled in the air, hinting at an impending battle. One zhong almost equal to 33.3 centimeters. Chapter 1601 The Emergence of the Celestial Amulet of Legacy. The first group of people whom Zhongxian managed to process consisted of Luo Ruoxin and Wu Chen. They had grim looks on their faces. On the opposite side were the four young men who emanated a vicious killing aura. Even before making a move, their auras had already permeated the entire room, as if signaling their dominance. They were the four otherworldly demons who they had tailed here. At close proximity, Zhongxian was finally able to get a clear look of the appearances of the four of them. Donned in a black robe, they had tall hats and a little stubble beneath their chins. These are the culprits who have kidnapped Zhao Ya, Wei Ruyan, and Yuan Dao. Zhongxian narrowed his eyes menacingly as he casually placed his hand on his waist, ready to make a move at any moment. The final candidate has finally cleared the trial as well. In this moment, a calm voice sounded in the air, breaking the heavy tension in the air. The adolescent boy sculptor walked over and faced the crowd. Since you have successfully cleared your respective trials, you are qualified to inherit the treasure that ancient sage Ranqiu has left here. Kuala. Right after those words were spoken, radiant light shimmered all around the room as a stone platform slowly rose from the ground. At the very center of the stone platform was an amulet the size of a palm. Ancient inscriptions were carved on the amulet. While it appeared to hold no extraordinary prowess at all, if one attempted to peer into it through one's consciousness, one would immediately experience a searing sensation in the mind. Is that the celestial amulet of legacy? Zhongxian wondered with a frown as he hurried over to Luo Ruoxin's side. The prime amulet was the very reason for their visit there. Since it had already emerged, it seemed like a fight could not be avoided anymore. Not only did they have to secure the amulet, they also had to capture those four and force them to reveal the whereabouts of Zhao Yue and the others. It has finally appeared. The four young men could not conceal the agitation from surfacing on their faces when they saw the prime amulet, and an excited gleam shone from their eyes. Paying no heed to the group of four, Zhongxian discreetly looked at the young lady beside him and asked, "Are you fine?" Since he had gone through so much danger in his trial, it was likely that Luo Ruoxin had encountered quite a bit of trouble as well. "Don't worry, I'm fine." Luo Ruoxin shook his head as she glanced at the belt around Zhongxian's waist and nodded in approval. "It seems like you have gained quite a lot from your trial." Not expecting to be found out so quickly, Zhongxian scratched his head awkwardly. "Haha, I guess so." Really, it felt as if there was nothing that he could do that could escape from her sight. The Dragonbone Divine Spear is powerful. With your current strength, you won't be able to draw out even 1/100th of its full prowess, but even so, it's already more than sufficient. Luo Ruoxin remarked with a smile. "Yuan." Zhongxian nodded. He was just about to continue speaking when the voice of adolescent boy sculpture sounded once more. "I can tell that both sides desire to obtain this celestial amulet of legacy. Since that's the case, let's decide the allocation through your strength then. Feel free to use any means at your disposal, and whoever manages to acquire it shall be the new owner of this celestial amulet of legacy." The adolescent boy sculpture chuckled softly as he addressed the crowd. "Since the elder has already said such words, we shan't stand on ceremony then." The scholarly young man of the group of four immediately dashed right toward the celestial amulet of legacy, intending to swipe possession of it. Wang. However, before his hand could reach the celestial amulet of legacy, it suddenly struck something hard. No matter how much might he exerted, he was unable to push his hand any closer toward the amulet. It was an isolation barrier. "You want to take away the amulet? Have you asked for my permission yet?" Wu Chen smirked disdainfully as he dashed forward as well. Unlike the scholarly young man, his target was not the amulet. Devastating might rumbled in his hand as he directed it toward the back of the scholarly young man. Audacious. Seeing that Wu Chen was intending to make a move on one of their comrades, a fragile-looking young man leaped forth, and with a furious roar, an ancient zither appeared at his fingertips. He stroked his fingers gracefully across the strings, and a ferocious melody burst forth. "Trying Ting. It's indeed an artifact of ancient sage Yang Yang." Zhongxian narrowed his eyes. This zither was not the strongest of ancient sage Yang Yang's artifacts, but it had been personally refined by him. Even the slightest stroke could produce the most imposing of notes, as if an army of thousands charging forward with an unstoppable momentum. Any ancient sage artifacts that could be preserved to this very day, even the simplest of them, were tools that could not be underestimated. Heh. Under the assault of the fragile young man, Wu Chen retracted his attack toward the scholarly young man and redirected his might to clash with the demonic tune. In the clash, ripples of shockwaves diffused into the surroundings. Over the course of the clash, Zhongxian could tell that both the scholarly young man and the fragile young man wielded fighting prowess that could match Yangsha. They had reached the pinnacle of great sage, the sempiternal realm. It was no wonder they could take Zhao Yue and the others away so easily. With their strength and the ancient sage artifacts in their possession, they were indeed a force that would be hard to stand against. "Ruoxin, I'll be counting on you to stop the fellow attempting to snatch the celestial amulet of legacy. If possible, try to find a way to snatch the amulet yourself. As for the rest, leave them to Wu Chen and me," Zhongxian said. Taking a deep breath, he touched the blood droplet in his palm, and a powerful surge of energy swiftly swept through his body. Since the culprits who had kidnapped Zhao Yue and his other students were there was no need for him to stand on ceremony. He would pry open their mouths and get their locations out of them. Yuan, knowing that the current Zhongxian had the ability to deal with those four young men, Luo Ruoxin nodded before dashing toward the celestial amulet of legacy. "Heh, How can I possibly allow you take the amulet so easily? With a deafening roar, a dark-skinned young man dashed forth, intending to hinder Luo Ruoxin. But barely after he took a step forward, he felt an immense pressure crushing down on him, forcing him to stop in his tracks. The next moment, he saw that Zhongxian was already standing right before him with a cold smile on his face. Get your facts right. Your opponent is me. Astonished by Zhongxian's sudden appearance, the dark-skinned young man instinctively realized that he would not be able to get past the other party easily, so he quickly barked an order to the last young man in the group. What are you dawdling around for? Stop her. The last young man finally recovered from his daze and hurriedly nodded. All right. Following which, he stretched his hand forth to grab Luo Ruoxin. This last young man was the tallest among the group of 4, and his body was slightly bloated as well, giving an impression that he was not too nimble. However, the fighting prowess that he displayed was extraordinary, not losing out to the other 3 at all. A powerful might rumbled from the last young man's hand, as if he wielded strength comparable to a devastating bolt of lightning. Ha ha ha, don't waste your effort. The 2 of you are mine. But before the last young man could get too far, a cold chuckle echoed in the air. Following which, a ferocious pressure pressed down on the last young man, dissipating whatever might he wielded in his hand. Astonished, the 4 young men could not help but shoot a glance at Zhongxian, who was holding a pitch-black spear in his hand, emanating a cold and lofty aura. Realizing that Zhongxian's strength was far beyond what they could deal with individually, the dark-skinned young man yelled anxiously, "Let's make a move together." Voila! Thus, the dark-skinned young man and the last young man whipped out their swords and flicked 2 bolts of sword chi over simultaneously. Even space itself seemed to moan under the tremendous force of their sword chi, and it appeared as if the bolts would rip Zhongxian apart if they struck him. Let me show you just how frightening an existence you have provoked when you chose to kidnap Zhao Ya and my other student. With a flick of his wrist, a sound reminiscent of a dragon's roar sounded from Zhongxian's spear as it bolted forward. Catcher! Catcher! A black hole appeared in the point of collision between the spear and the 2 bolts of sword chi, causing the entire atrium to shake intensely. Even though the folded space that they were in was extraordinarily stable, it was ultimately still an artificial space. It could not possibly withstand such frightening might. Peng! Peng! The faces of the dark-skinned young man and the last young man warped in horror as their bodies were sent flying into the distance, as if they had been struck squarely by a hammer. They crashed heavily into the wall, creating a massive hole behind them as blood seeped down from the corners of their mouths. With just a single flick of his spear, Zhongxian had successfully suppressed a coordinated attack from 2 sempiternal realm experts. For the first time, the ultimate fighting prowess derived from Kong Shi's blood droplet and the Dragonbone divine spear was shown to the world. Chapter 1602 Otherworldly Demons Indeed, where are Zhao Ya and my other students? After sending the 2 young men flying, Zhongxian continued walking toward them as a cold glint shone from the tip of his spear. In that instant, it felt as if he was a war god who had descended from the heavens. Tring ting! Just as Zhongxian was about to capture one of the young men for interrogation, a sonic wave swept in his direction, piercing toward his soul. Turning his head over, he saw the fragile young man wielding ancient sage Yang Yang's artifact stroking his zither in his direction. He immediately turned his sight to Wu Chen, only to see that the latter was currently bogged down by 3 golden warriors. These golden warriors wielded incredible strength that left the space around them crumbling with their punches. Even with Wu Chen's strength, he was still unable to subdue them within a short period of time. They sure do have plenty of artifacts. These 3 golden warriors were similar to the ones that they had encountered when they entered the Ranzi Hall. They were also the soldiers created by the personal writing of an ancient sage expert, harnessing his spirit and psyche. However, unlike the golden warriors that had materialized previously, these 3 did not suppress their cultivation at all, and their coordination was impeccable. As a result, even Wu Chen was having some difficulty dealing with them. A doubt arose in Zhongxian's mind. Golden warriors of Mentor's calligraphy, the ancient zither used by ancient sage Yang Yang. Are they really otherworldly demons? Not even the master-teacher pavilion was able to whip out so many precious treasures at once. Yet, these otherworldly demons actually had so many in their possession, and they used them as if they were not worth much at all. Could they possibly not be from the otherworldly demonic tribe but from the 100 schools of philosophers? However, if those 4 young men were truly from the 100 schools of philosophers, who were Luo Ruoxin and Wu Chen? After all, Luo Ruoxin had told him personally that she was not an otherworldly demon, and he really wanted to trust her. Flaws. With such a doubt in mind, Zhong Xian decisively activated the Library of Heaven's Path on them in hopes of uncovering their identity. 1. The Library of Heaven's Path jolted, but no books were compiled. What's going on? It can't be that they possess the discarnate constitution of divination as well, right? There can't possibly be so many people who have that constitution in the world. Zhong Xian narrowed his eyes. He could still accept not being able to read Luo Ruoxin and Wu Chen, but why was he unable to read these young men? Just what was going on? Those young men were currently executing their battle techniques, so he should have been able to read them easily. Could it be? Yes, that seems to be very likely. Even if they don't possess the discarnate constitution of divination, there's a very high chance that they might still have some artifacts on them that allow them to conceal themselves from the heavens. Otherwise, there's no way the master-teacher pavilion headquarters and the Zhong clan could have been unaware that they were going to kidnap Zhao Yue and the others. Zhong Xian nodded in realization. Given the importance of Zhao Yue, Wei Ruyan, and Yuan Dao in the expedition to the Temple of Confucius, the master-teacher pavilion had their most skillful seers keeping close tabs on them. If they were going to be captured, those seers definitely would have divined it, but that did not happen. The only reason for that was that the 4 young men were in possession of some method of concealing themselves from the view of the heavens. In a sense, this was similar to how the sage Shi's tortoiseshell was concealed from the detection of the heavens under the isolation barrier of the Shrine of Seers back then. It seems like I really should journey around the Shrine of Seers after leaving this ancient domain. Zhong Xian thought. If this went on, it felt like his Library of Heaven's Path would be rendered obsolete in no time. It was really high time for him to upgrade his Library of Heaven's Path. If that did not work either, the least he could do was learn about the various means to avoid the detection of the heavens so that he would be able to deal with them in the future. Forget it. Even if I can't see through them, I'll know after trying them out. Zhong Xian thought as he glanced at the 3 men before him coldly. Just because the Library of Heaven's Path could not see through them did not mean that he did not have any other ways of finding out. Even if otherworldly demons were able to disguise themselves as humans, they were still unable to alter the fundamental nature of their zhenqi. In times of danger, their instinctive responses would immediately kick in, thus exposing their true identity. Unless they were so powerful that they could deal with his attacks with ease. However, considering the strength of the 4 young men, the possibility of such a situation happening was non-existent. In any case, Zhong Xian did not believe that anyone beneath ancient sage would be able to hide their true forms from him. The 3 of you should come at me together. Zhong Xian roared in laughter as he flicked his wrist and thrust the spear forth. Wang. The sonic waves produced by the fragile young man were kept at bay by the spear tip, and taking a huge stride forward, Zhong Xian swept his spear in a horizontal arc in front of him. Voila! The spear flew toward the dark-skinned young man closest to him. Humph! With his flick of his wrist, the dark-skinned young man took out a brush to defend against Zhong Xian's spear sweep. Ding 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 ding! The brush swiftly chipped away at the might of the dragonbone divine spear with multiple strikes. While the dark-skinned young man was still forced to retreat 8 steps in the end, he managed to walk out of this encounter relatively unscathed. Is that brush another ancient sage artifact, too? Zhong Xian wondered in astonishment. However, knowing that this was not the time to allow his mind to wander, he smoothly maneuvered his spear into an upward flick to pierce the last young man. Tzzzzzzzzzzzz. A furious storm swept through the air like a hurricane, and the last young man's face immediately paled in the face of the spear. Trying ting. Just as the spear was about to strike the last young man, the fragile young man's zither started playing once more. This time, Zhong Xian did not resist the demonic tune. Instead, he drew the entire soul attack into his body. Catcher. In an instant, the metamorphosis that he had started under the pressure of the Dragonbone Divine Spear was immediately completed, and his soul began undergoing a qualitative change. Zhongxian could clearly feel his soul cultivation being raised to a whole new level. While it had not reached the level of great sage yet, it had become much purer, and the size of his soul was also reduced by almost half. With the current state of his soul, he was already able to pull off soul traverse. Refreshed from his breakthrough, Zhongxian could not help but burst into laughter. Ha ha ha, you have my deepest gratitude. Then, he took a step forward. Cold sweat immediately rained down from the last young man as alarm bells rang endlessly in his head. He hurriedly retreated, but Zhongxian's spear traced him relentlessly as if it was his shadow. No matter how the last young man maneuvered around the place, trying all kinds of movement techniques, he was unable to shake off the spear piercing toward him. Damn it, the dark-skinned young man cursed beneath his breath as he poured ink all over the place and began painting swiftly. In the blink of an eye, he had already painted a shield for the last young man to hide in. Sila. The Dragonbone Divine Spear collided with the painted shield and tore it apart with ease. Nevertheless, the painted shield did manage to reduce the might of the spear's pierce significantly. The last young man swiftly turned around, and with all his might, he deflected the spear with his sword, thus surviving this ordeal. Seeing how the last young man did not whip out any peculiar artifacts despite being driven to a corner, Zhongxian thought, it seems like this fellow doesn't have any ancient sage artifacts. To be honest, while the combination of Kong Shi's blood droplet and the Dragonbone Divine Spear did grant him incomparable fighting prowess, it would still take some time for him to capture those 3 young men alive. Unfortunately, there was a time limit to Kong Shi's blood droplet, so time was not a luxury that he could squander. Since that was the case, it would be best for him to focus his attention on the weakest young man who did not have any ancient sage artifacts in possession. Once one was down, it would be easier for him to take down the other 2. With such a thought in mind, Zhongxian decisively launched his spear toward the last young man once more. Tzzzzzzzzzzzzzz. If the previous attack was just a maneuver to try the last young man's hand, this would be the true deadly strike. Before the spear could even reach the last young man, a deafening sonic boom had already permeated the entire atrium. As if a fragile sheet of paper, the space standing between the spear and the last young man was callously torn apart, causing multiple spatial ripples to diffuse into the surroundings. Tying trinning. Trying ding. Not expecting Zhongxian to neglect the other 2 of them and focus his offense solely on the last young man, the fragile young man hurriedly stroked his zither. But even though the demonic tune that he played held fearsome might, it was kept at bay by the spatial ripples diffusing outward. Spatial interference. Damn it. The dark-skinned young man hurriedly rushed forward to protect the last young man as well, but with just a flick of the Dragonbone Divine Spear, his brush was sent flying. Let me kill one of you first to quell my rage first. Zhongxian bellowed coldly as he drove his spear forth. The last young man's face paled in fright. Knowing that he would be killed if he did not make a move, he raised his head and roared. Amid the deafening roar, his body swiftly increased in size. His already tall stature swiftly rose beyond 2 meters, and an overwhelming killing aura burst forth from his body, piercing into the heavens. You really are an otherworldly demon. Zhongxian narrowed his eyes menacingly. Chapter 1603 Escape. His conviction had wavered when he saw the group of young men whipping out ancient sage artifacts one after another before him, and he had wondered if he might have got it wrong once more. However, with the tall young man's transformation, it was apparent that the group of young men before him were not from the 100 schools of philosophers but otherworldly demons. To be honest, even though he really wanted to trust Luo Ruoxin, there had been just a hint of doubt at the back of his mind that he could not shake off. For that, he had even attempted to check on Wu Chen as well. In an instant, his face reddened in embarrassment. Luo Ruoxin had trusted him unreservedly, sharing any news that she had with him without any hesitation. She even gave something as precious as Kong Shi's personal handwriting to him as if it was nothing more than dirt. Yet, he had actually doubted her. The more he thought about it, the more embarrassed he felt. At the same time, Luo Ruoxin and Wu Chen also swiftly noticed the last young man reverting back to its original form as an otherworldly demon, and they were visibly startled for a moment. Since you are an otherworldly demon, I shan't stand on ceremony. Having verified the other party's identity, Zhongxian could not be bothered to waste his breath on words. With a furious bellow, he thrust the spear toward the last young man once more. Po! Regaining his true strength after reverting to his true form, the last young man's fighting prowess became much stronger than before. Nevertheless, he was still far from a match for the Dragonbone Divine Spear-equipped Zhongxian. Soon, he was pierced in his shoulder, and fresh blood gushed out from his gaping wound. At the same time, the fragile young man and the dark-skinned young man also had their hands full with the powerful attacks that Zhongxian sent their way from time to time. They could hardly find any time to catch their breath, let alone assist the last young man. Knowing that they would be defeated if this went on, the fragile young man bellowed anxiously, "Quick, grab the celestial amulet of legacy." "All right," the scholarly young man before the amulet quickly replied. He was currently in the midst of battling Luo Ruoxin. The young lady's attacks were neither fast nor powerful, but every strike carried some kind of unpredictable danger that would kill him the moment that he let his guard down. After trading a few blows, the scholarly young man found his arms becoming numb, and his face paled from the damage that he had accumulated thus far. They were all sempiternal realm cultivators, but for some reason, the members of trio before them were each more frightening than the last. The tides were simply not in their favor. If this went on, they might really lose their lives. Thus, the scholarly young man gritted his teeth and tossed a book out. Boom! As soon as the book appeared, it warped into a cloth that could conceal even the heavens. It fell right upon Luo Ruoxin, isolating her from the rest of the world. The writings of an ancient sage. Luo Ruoxin's face darkened as she hurriedly raised her palm to strike the cloth around her. However, all of the force that she exerted was completely absorbed by the cloth, preventing her from breaking out. The writings of an ancient sage harnessed immense powers, such that even half-ancient sage experts would be unable to break free, let alone sempiternal realm cultivators. Who? Heaving a sigh of relief, the scholarly young man turned his sight toward the celestial amulet of legacy. With a flick of his wrist, he took out a token and pressed the token against the seal around the amulet lightly. Wang. As soon as the token came into contact with the seal, the latter began dissipating at a visible rate. Voila! With a swipe of his hands, the celestial amulet of legacy was already in his grasp. Let's go. Having acquired the item that they had come for, the scholarly young man quickly beckoned to his comrades as he whipped out another jade token. He crushed the jade token forcefully, and a spatial rift swiftly appeared around him and swallowed him whole. Voila! Let's go. Seeing that they had achieved their objective in the ancient domain, the fragile young man and dark-skinned young man quickly grabbed the exposed otherworldly demon before retrieving a similar-looking jade token and crushing it as well. Where do you think you are going? Not expecting the young man to actually have such a method of escape, Zhongxian quickly tapped his finger ahead. Wang. The space around the three young men froze in place. The spatial quintessence of sealing had the ability to seal all energy disturbances within a given space. The jade tokens that the young men were using were probably some sort of teleportation formation, so by sealing the space, he would be able to prevent them from escaping. As expected, the three young men who were just about to escape through the spatial rift abruptly froze in midair, unable to move or escape. Speak. Where did you take Zhao Ya and my other students? Zhongxian roared with wintry killing intent. Zhao Ya? Do you mean the host of the Pure Yin Constitution? The fragile young man asked. That's right. Zhongxian eyed the three of them with a threatening gaze. If you want to find them, meet us at the Temple of Confucius. With a cold sneer, the fragile young man crushed an amulet that had appeared in his hand at some point in time. Voila! A calamitous surge of sword chi suddenly burst forth from the crushed amulet, tearing the sealed space in an instant. Wang. With the disappearance of the sealed space, the silhouettes of the trio immediately became illusory, signaling that their teleportation would be successful the next instant. Since you aren't willing to speak, you can die now. With crimson eyes, Zhongxian drove his spear right toward the three. He had gone easy on the trio in order to acquire news regarding Zhao Ya from them. However, since it was confirmed that they had taken her away, and they were already on the verge of escaping, he could not hold back his killing intent against them anymore. Those three young men might be powerful, but against the current Zhongxian, they were not even close to being a match at all. Voila! With raging might, the spear thrust forth. Humph! With a cold harumph, the fragile young man flicked his finger, and another surge of sword chi burst toward Zhongxian once more. Zhongxian was intending to use his spear to crush right through the sword chi, but a force behind him suddenly tugged him away. Hula! Wherever the sword chi passed, the annihilation of space could be seen, leaving a long gorge of dark destruction. Seeing such a sight, cold sweat dripped down Zhongxian's head. If someone had not pulled him back, he would have been sliced in two back there. But in the moment that he dodged the attack, the three young men also successfully slipped through the spatial rift and vanished. A myriad of emotions bottled up in Zhongxian, helplessness, frustration, and anger, culminated into a deep, long sigh. Turning around, he saw Luo Ruoxin standing right behind him with a disapproving frown on her forehead. "Do you want to die? That's an amulet left behind by an ancient sage, and it harnesses 1/10 of an ancient sage's strength. There's no way you could have stood against something like that. 1/10 of an ancient sage's strength." Zhongxian's face paled in realization of what he had just faced. It was no wonder that surge of sword chi was so powerful. Even if it was just 1/10 of an ancient sage's might, it was not something that the current him could stand against. Humph! I didn't think that they would have an inscripted amulet of an ancient sage and even a dimension flit amulet. Wu Chen walked over with a complicated look on his face, seemingly pondering deeply over something. Dimension flit amulet. It's a special type of amulet inscripted by an ancient sage specializing in spatial arts. It works similar to a teleportation formation when crushed, transporting the user over a distance of 1,000,000 li. To even have such an artifact in their possession, it seems like they must have spent a very long time preparing for this operation, Luo Ruoxin explained grimly. It can transport a person over 1,000,000 li away. Zhongxian clenched his fists tightly. If only he had known that those young men had such artifacts in their possession, he would have killed them right from the start. Had he just crushed their cultivation, they would not have been able to use the Dimension Flit amulet. Even though the Dimension Flit amulet allowed them to travel through space, if their cultivation was too low, they would not have been able to survive the spatial turbulence from the travel. After all the effort we have put into this, the celestial amulet of legacy still ended up falling in their hands. Wu Chen shook his head bitterly. It's fine. No matter who obtains the amulet, they will have to unlock the seal at the Temple of Confucius eventually. As long as we camp there, we'll be able to get in as well. It was a huge disappointment that the celestial amulet of legacy had slipped through their fingers, so they could only console themselves as such. Fret not. They might have gotten away, but they didn't manage to take the celestial amulet of legacy away with them, Zhongxian said. They didn't manage to take the amulet away with them? Luo Ruoxin and Wu Chen glanced at one another, unable to comprehend the young man's words. He. Instead of answering the doubts of the duo, Zhongxian turned his gaze toward the adolescent boy sculpture not too far away and asked, "May I ask if my words are correct? Celestial Amulet of Legacy, 500,000 kilometers. Chapter 1604 Prime Amule. The adolescent boy sculpture was taken aback for an instant before he chuckled awkwardly. What are you saying? I'm just an artifact spirit left here by ancient sage Ran Qiu to guide the visitors around. Luo Ruoxin and Wu Chen also had perplexed looks on their faces. This adolescent boy sculpture had been accompanying them around the Ranzi Hall from the moment that they arrived there. They had always thought of the other party as an enchanted sculpture, so how did he turn out to be the celestial amulet of legacy? If that was really the case, how could the four young men before them not realize it despite the number of ancient sage artifacts that they possessed? Artifact spirit? May I know what kind of artifact spirit you are then? Would you care to share it with me? Zhongxian replied with a smile. I am the artifact spirit birthed from this stone sculpture, the adolescent boy sculptor exclaimed. An artifact spirit birthed from this stone sculpture? Zhongxian's lips curved up as he placed his hands behind his back and circled around the sculpture. The material that you are made of is known as the Meigai rock. It's found in the far northeastern Lushu mountain of the continent, slowly tempered over an unimaginably long period of time through the grinding of tectonic plates, the currents of the ocean, and the searing heat of the underground lava. There aren't many of these rocks in the continent, definitely numbering no more than 10. The greatest property of the Meigai rock lies in its ability to nourish a soul. Souls that are deposited into it will grow more resilient and powerful. Ironically, due to the overwhelming soul energy that is harnessed within the Meigai rocks, it's impossible to gather the huge bulk of soul energy together to give birth to a conscious spirit. In other words, no matter how skilled a spirit awakener is, it's impossible to successfully enchant a Meigai rock. You mentioned that you are the artifact spirit of this stone sculpture. Why don't you tell me who the person that granted you life is then? The adolescent boy sculptor was visibly stunned by those words. He did not think that the young man before him would actually be able to identify a rock as rare as him, and he subconsciously took a step back out of apprehension as he replied, "It's ancient sage Ranqiu. The capabilities of an ancient sage go far beyond your imagination. Just because you aren't able to do it doesn't mean that others aren't able to do so. Ha ha ha." Hearing those words, Zhongxian's lips curled into a smile, as if he had managed to corner his prey. Ancient sage Ranqiu is one of the 10 apostles, and I am indeed incapable of fathoming the full extent of his capabilities. However, enchanted artifacts tend to have deep feelings for the spirit awakener that granted them life, thus making it extremely easily for the spirit awakener to tame them. Since ancient sage Ranqiu left the Ranzi Hall in your hands and entrusted you the mission of bringing the visitors around, I don't see why he wouldn't tame you. After all, there would be a risk that you could betray him otherwise. Yet, since meeting you, I've noticed that you have been addressing him as ancient sage Ranqiu instead of master. All enchanted artifacts harbored deep feelings for the spirit awakeners that enchanted them, and it was such a property that allowed spirit awakeners to easily control the artifacts that they had enchanted. This was similar to how the golems that he had enchanted before had only been willing to listen to him and no one else. Even a hatchling would view the very first life it saw as its parent, let alone an enchanted spirit. Since ancient sage Ranqiu had left the important Ranzi Hall, which even contained his personal weapon, to the care of the adolescent boy sculpture, there was no reason why he would not tame the latter, especially since he should have been able to do so easily. Yet, ever since they had entered the Ranzi Hall, the adolescent boy sculpture had never once addressed ancient sage Ranqiu as master. In fact, his attitude toward ancient sage Ranqiu could not even be said to be respectful. The adolescent boy sculpture was unable to refute Zhongxian's words. Silence loomed for a moment before he anxiously rebutted, "Even if I didn't acknowledge him as my master, I can't possibly be the celestial amulet of legacy either. Your deduction has no strong reasoning behind it at all. It seems like you won't admit it unless I spell it out clearly." A glint flashed through Zhongxian's eyes as he shook his head with a smile. "When we arrived at the Ranzi Hall, I challenged 2 golden warriors simultaneously and sealed the space around them. You mentioned that I was the successor of Qiu Wuzi and asked me to show mercy." "Indeed. What's wrong with that?" The adolescent boy sculpture harumphed doubtfully. He did recall saying such words, and he did not see any problem with them. While ancient sage Qiu Wu might have been Kongsha's subordinate, he was much older than Kongsha, and Kongsha addressed him as a peer. Considering how ancient sage Ranqiu is a disciple of Kongsha, even he would have to address ancient sage Qiu Wu with the utmost respect, not daring to overstep his bounds at all, Zhongxian said. In a sense, this was similar to how even though Sun Qiong was his subordinate, Zhang Yang and the others still addressed him respectfully as Uncle Sun. This was even more so for ancient sage Qiu Wu, who was much more aged than Kongsha. Even Kongsha regarded him with much respect, so how could ancient sage Ranqiu, as a student, dare to address him casually? On the other hand, you addressed ancient sage Qiu Wu directly as Qiu Wuzi, and that's an address that peers used to address one another. Zhongxian continued. As an artifact enchanted by ancient sage Ran Qiu, don't you think it's inappropriate for you to speak in such a manner? Why you? Taken aback, the adolescent boy sculptor backed away several steps as he stared at Zhongxian with a horrified expression. To be able to deduce that he was the celestial amulet of legacy just by the method of address. The young man was frighteningly sharp. Realizing that there was no longer any point in him concealing his true identity, the adolescent boy sculptor raised his head and asked, "When did you see through me?" He was confident in his disguise. Even if an ancient sage stood before him, the other party would not necessarily be able to see through his disguise. So, when did the young man see through him? Earlier, before entering the passageway, I noticed the peculiarity in your material when I patted your shoulder, and that was when I began suspecting you, Zhongxian replied. When he entered the granite door previously, he had walked up to the adolescent boy sculpture and patted his shoulder so as to use the library of Heaven's Path on him. Through the compiled book, he had learned that the material of the sculpture was not suitable for enchantment, but even so, he did not think too much about it. Or rather, with the danger that came right after, he did not have any time to think too much about it. However, with the escape of the 4 young men, he had suddenly recalled this matter, and putting it together with the peculiar address that the adolescent boy sculpture used for ancient sage Qiu Wu, he would have to be really dense not to figure it out. Considering how the celestial amulets of legacy were artifacts that Kongsha had forged, it would not be inappropriate for them to address ancient sage Qiu Wu informally as Qiu Wu Zi. Even if they showed a lack of respect for ancient sage Ran Qiu, the latter would not say anything. The true conclusive evidence was that he could feel a very familiar aura coming from the adolescent boy sculpture. The other 6 subordinate amulets were forged using the blood essences of those possessing unique constitutions, but as for the prime amulet, if he was not mistaken, it was likely to have been forged using Kongsha's blood essence. In other words, the familiar aura that he was feeling was that of a fellow celestial master teacher. With such a feeling guiding him, it would not be too difficult for him to figure out who the adolescent boy sculpture truly was. I see. As expected of Qiu Wu Zi's successor, not only have you mastered the spatial quintessence of sealing, you have also managed to tame the dragonbone divine spear. Your eye of discernment is truly extraordinary. Hearing Zhongxian's explanation, the adolescent boy sculpture confessed. You're right, I am the prime amulet forged by Kongsha. What those young men have taken away is a mere imitation. Chuckling softly, a ray of light rose from the head of the adolescent boy sculpture and converged in the air. In just a few moments, he had already transformed into an amulet. It was identical to the celestial amulet of legacy that the scholarly young man had snatched earlier. I am the prime amulet that Kongsha forged. Only the one who holds me will be able to enter the prime hall in the Temple of Confucius. However, my one true master is Kongsha, and I won't bow down to just anyone. Putting aside the fact that you are Qiu Wu Zi's successor, even if Qiu Wu Zi stood before me this instant, there's no way he'd be able to make me submit to him. The amulet declared regally. In response to those words, Zhongxian simply chuckled softly. You won't submit to me? Of course not, the amulet replied pridefully. Very well. I'll show you something first, and I'll accept any decision you make right after. Zhongxian raised his finger and tapped the amulet lightly. There's nothing you can show me that will change my mind. As an artifact created by Kongsha, how can I possibly submit to? Just as the amulet was declaring its stand pridefully, it suddenly shuddered before frightfully crumpling together in the air. Following which, it hurriedly stood in front of Zhongxian like an erect card and said in a fawning voice, Little amulet pays respect to master. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.